Okay, hello and welcome to a video that I have been quite excited to make for a while now. This is going to be the 2026 season start items video because, as you might imagine, if you know me, I've been working on items for the season start here. Love working on items, super hyped to talk to people about them, and in particular, this video is going to be focusing on the 9 new items which I made. I will also be talking about some of the other item changes as well as the returning items, some reworked items, all of that stuff. So let's get started talking about these awesome, or hopefully awesome, 2026 items. First of all, before I get super in depth on this, I want to talk about who am I, why am I making this video, in case you have no idea who I am and you're wondering what this video is all going to be about, because I'm sure this video is going to be really long, and so let me establish who I am. I am Riot Enstep, or Nick Fridge, or the Amptome guy. I'm the guy who changed the Amptome to 400 gold a couple of years ago. If you want to know all the things that I've done, here this slide has some of them. If you want a more complete list, you can go ahead and take a look at the League Wiki. You can search Endstep. I have a page on there that describes most of the things that I've done, so that'll give you a pretty good idea. But I'm a game designer that works on the Summoner's Rift team, on specifically the seasonal pod, and so I've been working on seasonal content for a few years at this point. And so I'm one of the designers that worked on the 2026 season, and that my part of that is items, right? I largely worked on items. I did do a few other things, but mostly I focused up on items here, and specifically on the new items. So let's talk about goals. Why did we want to do an items project, and what specific goals did we have for these items? From the very beginning, we wanted to make sure that players had more content to play with, right? Like every class got something new. Because one of the big motivators here, there are others, I'm not going to get into all of the motivating factors. One of the big motivating factors was we've actually been doing a lot of surveying of literally asking players hey, what do you want? In fact, we've done so much of it, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some people watching this video that actually got the survey of hey, here's some things that we could do. Earlier in the year, we were doing a lot of surveying, much earlier in the year, we're talking January, February, March, etc. We did a lot of surveying around hey, of these things, literally, which ones would you be most excited about? And the one that actually, I think to some people's surprise, not mine personally, but some people's surprise, actually hit number 2 in most regions and number 1 in a couple of regions was basically more interesting items, more items, and essentially a lot of the survey data that we had pointed to most players, generally being positive on the idea of, hey, current items could be more interesting, could be more complex, right? We, over the course of the past 5 years, we've had a bunch of different states, right? The Mythic era was way, 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 way more complicated. The current era is about as simple as it's ever been. And I think both from an internal perspective and, after the surveys, we're very confident players are saying hey, actually items could be a bit more interesting, a bit more complex. And so adding a bunch of new items, of course, is one way to immediately increase the complexity in the item system, right? The more items there are in every individual subsystem, the more decisions you have to make, and the more complexity there is. And I'll also note some reworks of and some reversions of items to previous states that are hopefully a bit more interesting, a bit more complex, and interesting people. So from the very beginning, one of the main goals was make sure every class gets something new. This isn't literally promising that if you're a one trick that you will get a new item, right? We're just, we just knew that wasn't realistic to literally change every single champion's build by adding new items. But we did want to give it, if you're a fighter player or an assassin player or a mage player, we wanted to make sure that every person who plays a specific class got something new. And specifically, if you look at the second bullet point here, that we actually spent more time supporting some of the subclasses that don't have as great depth in their itemization as we would like, right? At one point during this process, I actually did a full in-depth analysis of all of our different subclasses and how good their itemization is for each individual subclass. And then I targeted making items and prototypes and all of that for the subclasses that have the worst, or I guess I shouldn't say the worst, but the lowest depth of itemization. One thing I will note here is that depth is all relative, right? Some classes, and subclasses need more depth than others, and so you might look at it yourself and be huh, that's weird. There's a couple of new crit items here. but don't they have okay depth? It's like, well, we think their depth is far from where it should be, basically, and so we made 2 new items for them. And AD carries are going to be the main, like the class that gets the double shot on items here, because I happened to just make 2 items for them. There are 2 prototypes that ended up working out really well. So 9 items, of course, they're not going to be distributed evenly amongst classes. Additionally, we're also taking a look here. I'm not going to get in detail here, but like solving some historic class subclass issues, specifically talking about AD assassins on this one. I'll talk more about this when I talk about the individual items. And improvements for the least satisfying item systems as well. This one kind of ended up being a little bit washed out, right? There were larger scale changes to, for example, for the AD carry system that didn't end up making it because they weren't quite where we wanted them to be. But we did take some spins and like still take some cracks, and you'll still see some evidence of like, oh, like hopefully this item system is better. Some of the item systems that we thought were at their lowest quality hopefully should be improved by some of the changes that I've done and some of the new items that are coming in. Related changes, there are a bunch of new changes coming in with the season. If you haven't watched the like the dev blog, I don't remember what we call them, but that video, I'm making this video I'm making it ahead of time because I won't have time to make the video at the time. But I'm making this video and planning on putting it up the same day that the dev video is up, which actually has me in it. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It has me in it. You got to see me talking about these changes. Anyway, just a quick recap on some of the changes that are particularly relevant for the new season. I'm not going to go into detail on any of these, but 200% crit. For those of you not familiar with this, crits in the current game deal 175% of AD instead of 200% or instead of 100%, which is what the normal auto attacks do. This was actually changed at the beginning of the Mythic era because we were giving AD carries basically these perfect first items and smoothing out their power curve, making them much more powerful on one item. And so we had to take away power somewhere. And the main place we took away power was to say, okay, you're not going to scale multiplicatively quite as hard. However, what we found this led to over the years was that we generally had to felt like we had to buff spells because we then made their items have more AD, more AS on them, and we gave them more systemic sources of AS and so on and so forth. And we ended up in this place where we kind of had to buff spells, and we were kind of uncomfortable with that. Where we ended up creating some of these builds that we feel like in some cases were like moderately or significantly degenerate or just kind of undesirable. You think of things like lethality Xayah, pure lethality Caitlyn, like one-shotting people with the with the ult and things like that. And it's like the gameplay here isn't great, and it's not really the way the kit is designed. And so we decided to make a change here where we're going to put crit back to 200%. And in exchange, we'll be nerfing the crit champions builds. This does mean that if you're a non-crit champion, crit has gotten relatively better. Like crit is just a strictly better stat now, which means the AD carry items are relatively more powerful. But the champions that have access to using them at most efficiency will be a little bit weaker to compensate. I'm not going to go through all of those individual changes, but if you are an AD carry player and you like seeing big number, your big numbers have just gotten a little bigger. Hopefully that's fun for you, and AD carries will be dealing overall a bit more damage with their attacks, a bit less damage with their spells. This does mean that they will be a bit more gold scaling. One of the things that actually I think is as a positive from this is that this means that AD carries are actually relatively, this puts AD carries more relatively powerful in bot lane, where they get less experience because their spells are going to be nerfed and things like that, right? But anyway, like I said, I don't want to get too deep in depth on this. Other things, epic monsters are tankier, inner turrets have plates, and epic monsters have more resistances, so true damage is relevant against them, that's relevant, or more powerful against them, that's relevant for Bastionbreaker, we'll get to that in a bit. There's also role quests, so top laners will have more XP, that matters for level scaling items. Mid will have upgraded boots, the bot carry will have an extra item slot because their boots will go into a 7th slot. There's also no Otacon, and there's no feats of strength. Some disclaimers I do want to get into before I get into talking about the items and stuff, and also about the previous stuff I was just talking about. The exact numbers that I'm going to be showing on these items and just generally of stuff you're going to be seeing on the PB are not necessarily locked, right? Items in particular, we're still doing balance. In fact, I'm making this video on the last day of work before Thanksgiving, before the video, the weekend of the video comes out, or the weekend before the video, the dev video comes out. Whatever, ignore that. But I actually have, like, the versions of the items that you're seeing on the PB are, like, I haven't even played with two of them. Like, I just tuned two of the items. Not like, you know, I completely reworked the item or anything, but, like, I just completely redid the numbers on Bandle Pipes and one of the other items that I forget the name of. We'll get there. And another disclaimer related to me forgetting the name of them. The names are not final. Normally, we want to have the locked names on PB if we can. But unfortunately, the timelines for this season didn't quite work out, where this is the first pass on the names and actually the second pass on the icons. So most of the icons are final, like, or will probably end up being final. Some of them may get touched up. They might have minor differences, but you're probably looking at, like, you know, the icons, like, probably pretty close to the final versions. However, the names may not be final, right? We haven't gone through the various like legal and localization checks to make sure that we can actually, like, hey, maybe one of the names, you know, that we have is really offensive in some other language and we had no idea, right? So, you know, or it doesn't translate very well and we want to change it because of that or whatever, right? Very possible the names will change, so just keep that in mind. And of course, again, the numbers are not final. Some of these I'm sure still need tuning. I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to some of the items. But just wanted to get those disclaimers out of the way before I can finally talk about the stuff that I actually want to talk about, which is the new items. Starting out with Hexoptics C44. So, like I said, there's two 80 carry items. This is one of them. This is, in some ways, kind of a new take on what the original Yuntal was supposed to be. If you're not familiar, the original Yuntal was a AD crit item that bled enemies that you attacked. It was very lame overall, right? Like, you know, it was just, like, not a very exciting item. Like, there were a lot of things about it that felt like self-defeating in some ways, and it was just kind of a bizarre item where it's like scaled with crit, so it was like supposed to be a multiplicative item, but it was like flat, but the damage didn't scale, but it was just very weird. However, I think this is a much better take on that space of another AD crit item that is not a first item. And it was intentionally designed originally to compete with, say, like LDR or Infinity Edge as like a greed item and like a team fight item, right? You can see here it has two passives, right? Magnification and Arcane Aim. It has a takedown trigger where you get 100 extra attack range when you take someone down. So it's a team fight snowball item that lets you absolutely pop off if you can get the first kill. And then, of course, it has a self-synergistic passive here where if you're able to space away from your enemies and keep attacking, you get some free damage. Well, it's not free, right? You have to stay away from them. But if you're attacking at long range, you get some extra damage. Of course, this has synergy with the second passive because when you get 100 range, you then get to hit people from further away, which then gives you more damage, right? So, why this item? What makes this item good? What's it all about? Well, originally, like I said, I made it for, hey, this would be cool if there was this teamfight pop-off item that maybe if you were too poor to get an IE and you really wanted to take a gamble on popping off, or maybe if you didn't feel like you needed LDR and you were like, I just want more AD, or, we had this problem. One of the reasons why, like I was talking about, the original Yuntal was made, there was this idea of like, well, what if someone goes, insert first item here, usually it'd be collector, but like, let's suppose someone goes, collector first, or, whatever, right? Doesn't really matter. Essence Reaver, whatever. They go some item first, and then they buy IE, they buy LDR. And then they want to finish 100% crit. Maybe they don't think they need BT, or they don't need GA. They're like, I want my 100% crit, but they don't want a Zeal item. There's not really an item for them to buy, right? Because Collector and Essence Reaver are shaped very strictly to be good first items, and they're not as good later on in the game. They're just not structured like that. And so that was what the original Yuntal was supposed to fill in, was like, okay, what if you want this, you come into this situation and you want to finish 100% crit without a Zeal item. And originally that's what Hexoptics was supposed to be. However, over time as we tested it, people were like, well, actually, what if this was like viable as a second item? And that's why it's cheap. It's only 2,800. It doesn't build out of BF Sword. It's very easy to buy, right? And so we ended up in a place where I think there may be some champions that might want to go this second, like maybe Smolder, for example, might be interested in that. And there might be some situations where it's like, well, I buy a pickaxe, and maybe that goes into IE, maybe that goes into optics. It gives you some flexibility, right? Same thing with like the long swords and the crit cloak. Those have their own build paths they can go into. And so it gives some flexibility. I think there may be some champions that go the second, maybe third. Some people fourth. In general, we found that this item is really, really good, obviously, when your team has good ways of like bursting through one target, like say you have a Trundle on your team or something like that, because then you can really pop off. it's really not as good when you're getting Dove as an AD carry, right? It's like if you're playing Caitlyn and you're up against a Camille, this item's not that good, right? The Camille's going to jump on you. You're not going to get that bonus damage from magnification, and you're not really going to get that much value from the attack range unless you're really confident that the Camille, your team is going to peel the Camille off of you and you're going to be able to pull that off, right? And so it's kind of nice because I think it gives some extra situational context to AD carry builds that they're currently kind of lacking, right? It's like most of their builds are just like, yep, this is just the best damage multiplier, or I'm against Poke, I kind of need a BT, third or whatever this game. There's some some items like BT and GA have some context on them, but it's mostly not the crit items. So having a crit item that has some context around why you want to build it, I think is really, really nice for the system, and has actually led to some AD carries feeling, oh, actually, there's some interest, there's some decisions that I make here that are actually kind of interesting about like how I order my build and, what components I buy even because, like I said, this build's out of a pickaxe. So there's some pivoting that can be done here between this and the IE, with the crit cloak and the pickaxe, which can be pretty cool. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this item. Honestly, one of the big things, like the cause of the original attack range, so if you're wondering like, wow, 100 attack range is so crazy, how can you allow this? This is one of the things we tested really, really thoroughly in the beginning of like put this in was like, a lot, like the first time a lot of people read this item, they were like, there's no way you can ship 100 attack range for, well, originally it was 8 seconds, for a long duration, even if it's on takedown. And the more we tested it, the more people were like, no, actually this just kind of works, right? And I was prepared to lower the range down to like 75 or maybe even 50, because when we look at the origin of my thought of like attack range was the previous version of Lethal Tempo that had 50 attack range, right? That was really, really fun for people, getting that attack range, but being able to access that very easily in any combat by just attacking enough times, that was pretty messed up, and it was really hard for us to tune the attack ranges around that, and so that wasn't realistic. And so I was trying to, I basically I went looking for a trigger of like, okay, attack range is awesome. Like RFC does the one-shot version of that. How can I do a duration-based version of that? I actually thought about making an active item where it would be like, 5 seconds of extra range, but that had its own problems. But the takedown trigger, I think, ended up being really nice, and then later on I added the magnification passive to kind of synergize with that so that the item wasn't useless if you weren't getting kills. And also give it another lever to be tuned so that we don't have to tune it exclusively around the amount of AD that it has, which is nice because then we can make the build path something like this without issues. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this item. I kind of expect there to be some champions that really like this, that really care a lot about attack range. Right, again, I'll mention Smolder here. Something I'll also note is that magnification, at least currently, is not basic attack damage that it amps. It amps attack damage, which means if you have a Draven Axe, for example, Draven Axe gets folded into the attack. So it actually gets multiplied by magnification, which means that you can deal potentially at normal Draven range, you're dealing like 7.5-ish% more damage with your axes, which is pretty cool if you're hitting at max range. Something else I'll note about this item is that the range checking is actually done when the missile hits the target, not when when you fire the missile. And so this means that if someone's like dashing into you, it'll do less damage, right? It's intentionally constructed to not be very good against people diving you, and be good in the situations where you're able to actually space and kite properly. And so that's actually creates some interesting situations where like, hey, you could, fire your attack and then flash backwards for slightly more damage. If you want to do that, be my guest. I don't think that'll be good very often, but maybe there'll be some hype, some hype cuts of that, or some hype, montages of people flashing or dashing backwards to get more damage. We'll see, because it does, again, just check the distance between you and the target when the missile hits them. Another thing to note, by the way, if you're testing this item on PB and wondering why is the number slightly different sometimes, I discovered this myself when I was looking at testing this item, is that if you are walking up to a stationary target, like say you're Caitlyn, you right click on a target dummy or like a stunned target, you're not guaranteed to be exactly 650 range away. That's Caitlyn's auto attack range for anyone who doesn't know that. You're not guaranteed to be exactly your auto attack range away. There's some fuzzing going on with the server tick rate, as well as some other things like attack frames and such that it won't be exactly the same. So if you are out of range and you just right click like a target dummy, you might get slightly different numbers from time to time just because of base League of Legends stuff. The game has probably always been this way. I didn't deeply investigate it, but just keep that in mind if you're this is weird. Why is it sometimes doing 3 more damage or 4 less damage when I, hit this target dummy on the PvE or whatever? It's probably because of that, right? There's very, very, very small differences in how far away you're standing. You're not guaranteed to stand at exactly your auto attack range if you right-click a stationary target. So just keep that in mind if you're testing it out. Anyway, overall, I like this item. The C44 is a fun one. I think that some people will hopefully have a good time buying this item second. There's been some talks internally of like, hey, what if this was a first item or like more viable first item? Some people actually really, really, really want to buy this up first on like Caitlyn. Not actually sure how good it is. Like I personally haven't really seen anyone doing it in our tests. I wouldn't expect it to be better than other first items because our first items for AD carries are pretty pushed to be really, really, really strong when you buy them. But if you want to try it out, let me know how it goes. Yeah, this is a cool item that I'm hoping will be later in builds, typically speaking, like competing in maybe the second slot for a few champions, maybe the third or fourth slot, and a nice team fight pop-off item when you do really want to, you're really confident you can get that first kill and chain that through. So obviously, also really nice synergy with RFC. We saw some Jhin players going like. First item would go like Collector into Hexoptics into RFC. You can get some mega range fourth shots sometimes, which can be really, really, really fun to play with. And of course, the RFC gets extra damage out of the Hexoptics. There's really cool synergy there, on top of the fact that they just both give range, which can lead to some pretty crazy things for one attack, of course, right? And that's kind of why that's permissible that they stack, is that the RFC falls off after one attack. So it's kind of like, okay, well, you got your one shot. If you didn't kill the person, a lot of the times that means that they're like not going to die to you, because that means they're 150 range out of your Hexoptics bonus range, right? Because RFC gives 150. So, cool item. I do like this one and hope people enjoy it. Let's talk about the other AD carry item, which has also kind of a long story attached to it. So, this is kind of a remnant of a previous version of the AD carry system that I was working on, like a rework. So, as I mentioned, in one of the earlier slides, let's go back and take a look at it actually. One of the goals was improve some of the least satisfying item systems here at the bottom. This is one of the original goals. One of the things that I was trying was reworks of the AD carry system, like completely redoing like the first and second slot, taking different versions of the AD carry system and like seeing like what other first items there could be. We ended up deciding against actually shipping any of it, cutting down on prototypes, and I decided to focus my efforts on the 9 items that we ended up shipping here. Just wasn't enough time to do everything, right? There's always trade-offs of like, if you're doing one thing, that means you're not doing other stuff. But this is one of the remnants from one of the AD carry items where this was originally a first item. Now you can see it's a Zeal item. Obviously, who's going to buy a Zeal item first, right? So what's the story there, right? So this was originally a AD crit, and then there was an AD/AS non-crit version of it as a first item, which was really interesting, right? I think that version was in some ways more compelling because, of course, ultimate haste on like a first item is obviously like something that's like, well, it makes sense, right? If you haven't actually read the item or like you don't understand this, I probably should redo this tooltip for what it's worth. But basically, this item is very similar to like Sword of the Divine, if people remember that, like the version that was in the game for a long time, not the no dodge version, obviously, but the version that said like you get 3 attacks very quickly that all crit. However, you get reduced crit damage in this case, and it actually checks if you would already crit. And if you do, you get the full damage of your crit, and you get a little bit of bonus true damage on top. So where did this item come from? What was the original goal here? Well, like I said, originally this was a first item, and I was targeting some of the champions that like we have in the AD carry system who have steroids on their ultimate, right? This is Twitch, Yunara, Zeri, maybe even like Ashe or Varus potentially, though this version of it on a Zeal item is like a little bit less attractive for Varus. Of course, he hasn't been building crit in a long time. But the idea here being that there's actually a decent number of AD carries that play heavily around their ultimate. And so having an item that gave them ultimate haste and, gave them a steroid when they ulted was something that was real, like pretty obviously like, immediately like, oh, this is really cool. The very first version of this was actually a Shiv rework, interestingly enough, which was you get 3 Shiv lightning procs that were very heavy on damage, when you ult. And there was something cool about that, but it didn't really make that much sense at the end of the day. It was kind of like, why am I like getting AoE Shiv procs when I ult? And so I changed to this version where it's like guaranteed crits and attack speed instead of 3 Shiv lightnings on your ult, and then reverted Shiv to the version. There's no changes to Shiv for this season, at least currently. We don't have anything planned. But yeah, the original version of this was a Shiv rework where it was like you ult and then you get 3 gigantic chain lightnings. And the idea was that, like, okay, Yunara, Zeri, Twitch, right? Like these the ult skewed AD carries, they like ulting and popping off in team fights, for the most part. They also like ulting in lane and killing their lane opponents, of course, right? But they like, popping off with their ults. And this is where we kind of ended up where, hey, what if we just gave them guaranteed crits to give them some consistency early on, right? Even if they have to be, reduced damage. We give them a compressed boom, 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 3-tap auto, which feels really good. And how can we make that feel good for them? And that's what, that's how we ended up here was, one of the things I felt like I had to do in that this item system, on this item was compensate you if you would have already crit. Because this item was obviously, Twitch, Yunara, Zeri, these are crit champions, right? And so I didn't want to leave them kind of like out in the cold in terms of like, oh, you have to buy this item and then not go crit afterwards is really weird. That would have made it more like a Master Yi, maybe Rengar type of item, which would not really have been good if we had to tune that around them, because this is, again, intended to be more of an AD carry item. Actually, for what it's worth, I don't mind if Master Yi buys this item. It could be cool. But, it was intended to be for them, right? And so I came up with this system of if you would crit, you get some bonus instead, and you do get your full crit damage. I want to be clear about that. That's one of the reasons why I need to rewrite this tooltip. It's not super clear. I got to do that. Anyway, so let's talk about how did this end up as a second item, right? Why not a first item? Well, the problem that we ran into was when it was a first item, it became this really, 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 really sharp snowbally experience where no matter what stats I gave the item, if it was at all powerful and gave a meaningful amount of ult haste at all, what it would do was Twitch, Yunara, Zeri, like all these ult skew champions, even like Ashe and Varus, would buy this item first, and if they had any kind of advantage, they would just force their lead on you, because these champions are generally, for the most part, pretty good at doing that, right? Like you think of Zeri just like flying over a wall on you and then using her ult to catch up to you. Yunara REing, Twitch stealthing on you to the side of you, and then ulting, and Ashe ulting you, Varus ulting you, etc. These champions actually largely have a lot of agency in their ultimates, and so giving them a lot of ultimate haste and then damage during their ultimate meant that if they got access to that first item without trading off damage, right? You can still buy this item first, but of course you're going to be trading off a lot of damage if you do that. If you got that item, what we found was that it led to these really, really, really snowbally game states where like Twitch would either get the item in a reasonable amount of time and start turbo snowballing on people because his cooldown would be very low, which for what it's worth, by the way, I think Twitch ultimate cooldown is too low. It's crazy that it's 90 seconds at every rank, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so ultimately we decided this is too snowbally, it's too sharp. We can't let these champions have this item with no trade-offs as a first item, because it leads to these situations where if they get a successful ult play off, once they get the item, they just start repeat killing their lane opponents over and over and over and over again. And that wasn't the most desirable situation, I'll say. So what we thought about was like, okay, well, the item is still cool and it's still fun. And so my immediate thought was like, okay, let's try a second item version. And actually what that let me do was add more ultimate haste, right? The previous versions were like 15 or 20. 30 might still be too much. We might need to tune this down a little, but as a Zeal item, it's a lot safer for it to be giving a lot of ultimate haste because you pay a pretty big price to buy this thing first on most champions. I think there's a number of champions that this item is really, really fun on. Like Vayne is a really fun one. I highly recommend that one. I don't know if it's actually good, but it is super fun. Tryndamere is really fun. I kind of doubt it'll be his optimal item, but it is pretty fun to just do the Tryndamere thing. The first time I bought this, I went up to a guy I did it to afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, it was like that like call an ambulance, but not for me meme. Whereas like I thought I was winning, and then I Tryndamere R'd, and then went bop bop bop, crit him 3 times, and just killed him while I was immortal as Tryndamere ult does. So that's pretty cool. So I'm actually interested in seeing like the stuff that people come up with this item. Seeing how this actually plays out, and 30 ult haste. You can now get ult haste as an AD carry. And yeah, if you're wondering, like, was this in any way inspired by people wanting to buy Hexplate on AD carries? Yes. Like, that was one of the things that initially led me down this road was like, hey, these Zeri, like, when Hexplate first came out, for example, Hexplate was like 50% pick rate on Zeri. It was terrible. It was like 6% lower than the next, like, than like, you know, the actual, like, next most popular item. But obviously people want this kind of experience of like, oh, my ult cooldown is lower. And I think with Hexblade, of course, the speed, like the movement speed is a factor too. And this doesn't have that. But ultimately, this is just like, I'm hoping this is fun for people and it's sustainable. And ultimately, for champions like Yunara, Twitch, Zeri, this is a trade-off against Runons, right? You're probably not buying both. I mean, I guess you can if you really want to. But my expectation is that you'll probably buy one or the other. And that this will be your single target option, or like your burst and more snowbally option. And Runons will be your safer option that's better for team fighting because it gives you much better, you know, AoE and like much better overall wave clear and all that kind of stuff, right? But this will be your option if you want to just snowball, you know, maybe not play for team fights, which not playing for team fights is going to be more relevant because, of course, objectives, the epic monsters are tankier and side lane turrets have plates on them that are, you know, more, you know, you can actually have partial successes when you're, you know, pushing inner turrets and stuff like that. So hopefully this is a nice item for 80 carries to be able to pick between, do I want AoE from Runons or do I want big burst on ultimate? And of course, some champions I think will use this really well, like say Ashe, for example. Of course, Ashe loves ultimate haste. That's just a given, right? So that's Fiendhunter Bolts, hopefully people enjoy this one. I wonder if I should change this build path. I should think about that more. I never really considered whether this was the right component. I'll think about that at some point. Let's talk about this item. So this is going to be an item I'm going to say straight up, like before I even get into talking about it, this item is risky. We know that making this item, we are taking a risk. We acknowledge that. If we have to rework this item in a few months, that's a risk that we willingly took on making this item. I just want to establish that right off the bat before I get into talk about this item. So let's look at what this item is. It is a Brutalizer plus Dirk item. It has the most lethality in the game. It's expensive. It's a more slot efficient item than most assassin items, right? AD Assassin, most of their items are a little on the cheaper side, right? So what's up with that? Well, it's got two passives. The first one is pretty boring, pretty straightforward. You get some bonus true damage that scales with lethality on your spells every so often. Sure, cool, nice. Not much to say about that, right? It's mostly there just so that we can tune the item and actually push it back a little bit in builds because we don't really want people buying this first unless they're willing to pay some kind of cost here. The second passive is the more interesting one, Sabotage. So whenever you kill someone and you dealt damage to them within 3 seconds, right? So this is not like throw your Jarvan flag and get 1,000,000 assists and get Sabotage for free. You have to actually hit them, like most of our takedown triggers these days. You get Sabotage for 90 seconds. Note, as of right now, you don't lose Sabotage when you die. That might need to change at some point in the future. We're not sure about that. We tried both versions. We're probably going to ship with the version where you don't lose it if you die, but we'll see. And then when you have Sabotage, your next attack consumes Sabotage. I should probably make that more clear in the tooltip. It goes away when you use it once. To deal a massive burst of true damage over 3 seconds. It scales with lethality. Very, very, very well with lethality. So if you have 3 lethality items and you hit a turret, you will be cracking a plate. 100%, right? Like you will crack a plate. The inner turrets have 3 plates on them for what it's worth right now. So like you're dealing over a third of the turret's HP if you have a few lethality items on you. These passives, by the way, are both range modded because, of course, ranged champions have better access both to hitting people with spells and also hitting turrets and epic monsters. So a couple of things here. One question I'm sure people have is like, why is this damage over time? Main reason is because the damage on this can get very, very, very high. And one of the things we saw when it was a burst was that, random assassins would jump into epic monsters, auto-attack them to steal them, like it was dealing more damage than Smite. And it kind of needs to deal more damage than Smite in order to work. But we can't let it just be better than Smite, so it kind of has to be damage over time. And it's weird if turrets are a burst and epic monsters are damage over time. And we want it to work on both. They might need separate tuning for what it's worth. I might need to split that out. But I haven't figured that out. It seems like that's fine right now. Anyway. So that's why it's damage over time, is basically because of the smiting case. And also another thing is like with Crystalline Overgrowth, which is an upfront burst, you can do some really shocking, turret dies from half HP instantly kind of things, which was a little bit surprising. I wanted to give people a chance to respond of like, oh wait, my turret is dying, I should back off, right? Stuff like that. So the damage over time, I think the current VFX, if you see them on the PB, are probably a little bit under where they should be. They probably need to be punched up a little bit. Hopefully we'll be able to get to that. But anyway, so why this passive? Like, why are we letting AD Assassins be better at, or giving AD Assassins a better option for blowing up turrets and epic monsters? So, if you've played a lot of League of Legends, you've probably run into this scenario a number of times. Have you ever, can you recall a situation where you were in a game with an AD Assassin, maybe you even were the AD Assassin, where the AD Assassin, your Rengar, your Talon, your Zed, whatever, has a lot of kills, right? Kiana, Kha'Zix, they've got a lot of kills, but they can't end the game. This is a really frustrating experience for both the AD Assassin and the people getting killed by them, right? It's like, I'm sure lots of people can think of a time when they were like Caitlyn getting constantly jumped by a Rengar, but the game was just not ending, right? Because ultimately, killing people, it doesn't directly progress the game. It might help you progress the game indirectly because there's less enemies on the map, and that might let you push a tower or take an epic monster or whatever, right? But especially one-for-oneing on AD Assassins is not good for progressing the game. It's actually good for stalling the game, right? You imagine the game where it's like you have a fed Caitlyn or whatever, and the enemy Rengar keeps one-shotting your Caitlyn and going one-for-one with her, right? And you can't, push down the turrets because the Caitlyn, everyone else on your team is melee or whatever. You're having a hard time killing neutrals, whatever, right? There's a lot of situations here you can probably think of in your mind where it's like, oh, a really frustrating experience on both sides of like, oh my god, I'm Rengar, but I can't actually end even though I have 16 kills. Or I'm Talon, I can't win the game even though I'm 10-2 because I just can't get my team in the right position to actually hit an epic monster, or I can't snipe I can't take this dragon fast enough, therefore we can't take it at all even though I just got to pick on their jungler or whatever, right? Lots of these really frustrating situations on both sides. We wanted to take a crack at resolving or at least mitigating, maybe not resolving, but mitigating. What does it look like to say that AD Assassins that are ahead have access to better tower damage and better sniping of neutral objectives? I will note that because this is flat true damage, it's relatively a lot better against like dragons because it takes a much higher percentage of the dragon's health bar. One of the things that I really enjoyed playing with this item in test was like playing AD Assassins mid, like I was playing like Zed mid in one game. I got a kill on someone in the side lane, and the other 8 players in the game were 4v4ing top side around the Baron, and I was like, oh, actually the dragon's about to spawn, and I'm even though I'm half HP, I can just sneak this dragon while the rest of the teams actually just like fight on top side, and this like thing actually does a lot of damage to dragons. It's pretty nice to help you take dragons. Really nice for like Kha'Zix, for example. I think Kha'Zix is pretty fun with this item where you get a kill, you go jump on the dragon, and you just use your evolved Q and you just rip it apart with the with the damage over time. You can like burst the dragon down pretty quickly, even though they're tankier now. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The goal here is that there is a systemic outlet for AD Assassins to help alleviate some of that frustrating, like you're dying over and over again to the AD Assassin, or the AD Assassin is getting a lot of kills but can't actually win the game. That's what we're trying to do here. We do know that this can lead to really, really, really snowball cases, right? One of the first things we saw in the very first prototype of this item was actually Wick on Gat was like showing me clips of this, of like, he's playing Talon, he's split pushing a lot, he's getting a ton of kills. Because he's getting kills, he's getting plates. The plates give him gold, he gets more gold, he gets more, more items, he gets more kills, he gets more plates. And it's like kind of this cyclical, like the Bastionbreaker gave him gold, which then, he already could get the kills. The Bastionbreaker then turned those kills into gold and map progress. And then the gold turns into he's even stronger, so he could get more kills, which then turned on the Bastionbreaker again, which then let him get more turrets. And it's kind of this like powerful cycle. However, the hopes are, or like the goals are, that the heavy lethality scaling limits, how accessible this is, right? It's, again, both these values on this item scale very heavily with lethality. The item is expensive and gives a lot of lethality itself as well. And again, we know it's a risk, but we think the upside is worth is worth the risks that we're taking here. And hopefully AD Assassin players are excited about this and interested in, hey, can I end the game? Or alternatively, hey, at the end of the day, if you just want to buy this because it has a lot of lethality on it and it's just a brutalizer and a Dirk item, that's also fine. right? That's something is like something I was always interested in was like, what does it look like to combine these two components? Basically, ever since we re-added Brutalizer, I was very interested in like, what does an item that has both of them look like? And ultimately, the conclusion I came to, and this was probably like last year, I think, was it has to be an item with some kind of utility because there's only so many different ways we can give AD Assassins damage, right? If you're an AD Assassin player, you're sitting here thinking like, why are they giving me this weird utility? I just want to kill people. The short answer is that, like, well, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, is like killing people doesn't always progress the game. And there's limits to how much power we can give you in just killing people, right? Every other class has other outputs that they have, right? AD carries are really good at doing, taking towers and hitting neutral monsters, right? Mages have CC to set up for their team. Tanks have CC and they can frontline. Fighters have CC and they can frontline. Usually, usually they do at least one or the other. Sometimes they don't. But assassins in general don't really have other outputs. This is why, for example, like the middle drawer of domination is vision focused, right? This is why Umbroglaive exists. Is that we've been looking for other avenues to give AD assassins power because the ultimate reality is that if AD assassins have 100% of their power tied to killing people, that's actually not a super satisfying end for anyone because as the AD assassin player, you still have, as the AD assassin, you still have to be balanced, right? And so you might kill a lot of people, but that won't lead to you winning the game a lot of the time, right? It'll lead to you winning the game probably 50% of the time, roughly. And so giving AD assassins these other outputs can give them ways to, hopefully contribute to winning the game that don't rely exclusively on killing people so that in the situations where, say, you can't kill people, you have something else to do, for one. For two, in the situations where you can kill people, you can get some other additional value out of it, right? That's like what this is for, so that you don't have to, your champion and your class in general doesn't have to be tuned to just kill everything that they touch, right? Anyway, I'm probably spending too much time on this item, although I'm sure I already know this item. This video is going to be crazy long as it is, so it is what it is. This one's for the this one's for the real homies that want to listen to me ramble on for hours. So anyway, yeah, I'm sure I'll be talking more about this item in the future, and I'll be looking at it. This, I think, is of the new items by far the riskiest and the one where we would consider it probably a worthy experiment if we had to rework this item in a couple of months and said like, hey, you know what, it didn't work out. But at the same time, at least we tried. This is a new space for AD assassins, killing, epic monsters in towers. Maybe that'll work. Maybe it won't. We'll see. But I'm very interested to see how this works out. Yeah, Bastionbreaker. Hopefully cool. Hopefully good. Hopefully people like it. If you hate it, I'm sorry. But again, like I said, I tried to actually, well, I don't think I talked about this. I tried a lot of different prototypes for the AD Assassin space. This is one of the ones I actually tried a lot of prototypes. We tried some items that kind of bridged the AD Assassin and Fighter space. We tried some items that were more bridging like the Mage space. That's actually where this first passive comes from. It's like an ability trigger. We tried a number of different items. And ultimately the conclusion that we came to was like, given the current set of AD Assassin items, we kind of have to do something that's a utility output because all of the the killing people routes are taken, right? It's like getting to people or like mobility to get to them is already taken, right? That's Ghostblade. Mobility after you kill someone, that's opportunity. And there's already like a variety of different types of damage items, right? It's like there's hubris, there's opportunity, right? It's like there's even profane hydra for wave clear. And so there's limited amounts of ways that we can give you to kill people in your items. And so the conclusion we came to was like we kind of have to give something that's not literally just killing people. Not necessarily saying it had to be this exactly, but that if you're thinking like, oh, all I wanted to do was kill people, well, guess what? Look, you can get a Brutalizer Dirk item now, and that'll help you kill people too, as long as you can pay, right? Obviously, this item is pretty expensive, so there is that, but it also has a lot of lethality, so hopefully that's fun. All right, let's talk about this one. So this is actually two items in one. Technically, there's a base item because this is a tier item. This is hopefully a fun one for people. This is the base item, by the way, is currently called Murmuring Circlet, I believe, and then it upgrades into Diadem of Songs. Kind of similar to the other tier items. Manamune Muramana, Archangel's Staff into Seraph's Embrace. So this has two passives, right? It has a mana scaling heal and shield power, just like every other tier item. It has a mana conversion to a stat, and it has a mana conversion to an effect. So how does this work? Or why did we make this? I guess not how does it work. I think it should be pretty obvious how it works. So why this, right? Because this is the old Moonstone passive stapled onto a tier enchanter item. So how did we get here? Well, the actual truth is that I started out with a number of different enchanter prototypes. The one that I first put in was called Balance Bell. And the idea was I was like, okay, I was looking at the enchanter space and I said, okay, so there are basically two different kinds of enchanter items for the most part. There's do a thing when you heal and shield, right? This is Ardent Censer, Staff Flowing Water, Moonstone Renewer. And there's here is a new ultimate, right? This is Mikhail's, this is Redemption, this is Shirelia's, right? And then there's a couple of oddball items, right? There's like Imperial Mandate, which is like the damage item. And then there's Dawn Core, which is like a capstone, right? Which mostly doesn't make that much sense for this class. Though I will note we're actually giving supports a little bit more gold per 10 in this season. So Dawn Core might become a little more real, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so I was looking to make something that was different from the two sort of established like archetypes of support items that we have of the do a thing when you heal or shield and here's a new ultimate. And so Balance Bell originally was another stat conversion item. It took your mana regen and turned it into health regen, or gave you 100% of your mana regen as health regen. It didn't take away your mana regen. And then it said, if you're above 90% health, you get a little bit of movement speed and some heal and shield power. And the idea was that it would play into this fantasy that some people have of like the backline enchanter, right? Like you're the Janna who's playing really far back. You're never going to get hit, right? Because it gave you a payout if you were above 90% health. And then the health regen, of course, helped you stay there, right? If you did get hit by a random spell or whatever, you could actually get back up to 90% health. So it was kind of a cool package. And there were some people that did really like that, right? That really felt like, oh my god, this is for me. Because also it was like a light roaming incentive, right? Because it gave you movement speed when you're above 90%, which meant that when you left base, you would always have the movement speed on. And so you were a little bit better at roaming, right? And I think it was like maybe a little bit too clever in some ways, where it was like, oh, like the health regen synergizes with the above 90%, and the above 90% plays into this enchanter fantasy that people have. But ultimately, I think it was, in some ways, too clever for its own good, and in some ways, just like not cool, right? Like, yes, there were some people that did really like it, but it was a very small minority of enchanter players. Like, I probably had, that balance belt, I probably had like, I don't know, 15 different enchanter players play it, and I think two of them told me, like two of them were like, oh, I get it, this is so cool. And the rest of them were like, I don't get it, I don't care about health regen, or I don't want to have to stay above 90% or whatever, right? So while it was cool for some people, I scrapped it. And what I ended up doing was I was kind of out of ideas at this time. So I went on a walk with Xanos and Nax. These are two designers that used to be on SRT that are no longer there. But I went on a long walk with both of them, just workshopping ideas for enchanter items. And I don't even remember who came up with this. I think it was Naxt. But he threw out this idea of like, what about a tier item, right? Sona buys Archangels and Seraphs every game. And some of the enchanters, even with a lot of mana regen, can actually still go or, wouldn't mind buying, having a lot of mana, or might even have the ability to bridge into the mana, right? Like you pointed out, rightfully so, like if you're a Karma or a Seraphine, you can go right? If you're spamming your spells a lot. And they actually have some outputs that reward them for buying certain mage items, right? Like the obvious one here is like Karma with Malignance, but Seraphine also doesn't mind some of the mana items that we have in the system. And so I was like, damn, that's a really nice idea. That's really cool. And I remember I sat at my desk and I was like, okay, so I know the shape of item, like the build path and like how I want the item to work generally, but what is the passive, right? What is the part that scales with mana? Besides, the stat one was obvious. Of course, that was going to be heal and shield power, right? For an enchanter item, right? Much the same way that Mana Immune gives AD and, Archangels gives AP and all that, right? Heal and shield power was easy. The question, though, was what's the unique effect that scales with mana? Because all of the tier items have a unique effect that scales with mana, right? Seraph's shield scales with your mana. Mana Immune, the on-hit and on-spell damage scales with mana, etc., right? So I was really like looking through, old enchanter items and stuff just to get like reworks and stuff just to get ideas for what that would be. Like, and I was looking at the old Moonstone. I was like, wait a second, this item is actually pretty cool, right? Like the old Moonstone was just a really fun item. And one of the it wasn't removed because it was like a super problematic item. It was removed because the designer who was working on that space at the time thought the new Moonstone was more compelling and fit the Enchanter class better. But this item actually doesn't necessarily only have to fit the Enchanter class, right? It's a mana item, so it has synergy with mana items, and so it does, it's intentionally there to like sort of bridge with the mage system a little bit. And so this effect, scaling with your mana, not necessarily needing to be a pure Enchanter input and output, was actually okay. And so the fact that the input for the old Moonstone effect of just get in combat is not an Enchanter input necessarily, was actually totally cool here. And so I put this together, and this is one of the only prototypes I put this in. Like, this is basically almost virtually, I'll talk about the one difference, but like virtually identical to the item I put in as a prototype first. It was like immediately, not only did we have a bunch of people coming to playtest literally saying, I saw your email, I want to play Sona and playtest tonight. That was funny that happened multiple times with different people. But not only were people coming to play Sona, but people were very happy with this item on a surprisingly large variety of champions, right? We saw people building this on Milio, on Zillion, on Karma, and on Seraphine, and having just a ton of fun with this item. And it was pretty immediately obvious, like, this item is cool. It's great, right? Like, it's legitimately, this item is just great. And so the only change, the one thing that is different from the original prototype is, if you look at this bottom line here, while you or any ally you've healed or shielded in the last 3 seconds is in combo with champions, you trigger this thing every second. The thing I added was the ally you've healed or shielded in the last 3 seconds is in combat, because this is something a lot of people complained about with the old Moonstone. I think rightfully so, was that it was very awkward if you were like, with the old Moonstone, you're Nami, for example, you W, your AD carry who's like fighting over there, or I guess Nami W is not a good example because it would then bounce to an enemy probably. But I don't know, you're Sona, you W an ally, or your Karma, you E an ally who is in combat. It kind of feels weird that your item doesn't trigger. So what this does is essentially the item has an off state and an on state. And what healing or shielding someone who is in combat with champions basically says, I turn the item into the on state for 3 seconds. And whenever you're in combat, it says, it checks if you're in combat 4 times a second, and it says, if you're in combat, turn the item on for 3 seconds. That's all of this does. I actually think this tooltip is probably fine as is. It's a little bit more complex under the hood than what it's indicating. I think people will just get it. It's pretty intuitive once you play with the item. But yeah, I'm actually really happy with this item. This is, again, like I said, one of the items that like I put in this item for prototype, and it's just very immediately obvious. Like, yeah, this just works. And something to note, I think I'll cover this. I think I have a slide for this later, or it's on a slide later. But you can actually buy multiple tier items again. So I wouldn't be shocked if certain champions, like say Sona, had a build where they go Diadem or they go Seraphs early on, and then maybe as like a third item, they go for another tier item. So that was one of the things I decided to unrestrict for this season. I think it's just mostly just good fun, right? The actual story of the tier item, I'll tell that story later when I get to that slide. But yeah, you'll be able to buy multiple tier items again. So if you're a Sona player and thinking, oh man, I'm being forced to choose between this and Seraphs, technically no. I mean, I think most games you probably won't be able to finish both of these because you have to stack 2 separate tier items. But if you want to have both in your full build, you absolutely can. And if they want to do that on Sona or Seraphine or Karma or Lulu or whatever, you can absolutely do that. So should be pretty high synergy because they both, of course, scale heavily with mana. So that should be fun. Anyway, yeah, this item is pretty nice. I actually ended up really liking the item. And I will note that if you're looking at this and saying, like, why is it 4,500 gold? That's just how our tier items display in the shop. I would like to get this fixed at some point. But yeah, it actually is 2,250 right now. Might need to change this price. My current read on this, or at least the current read from the game analysis team, is this item is probably too strong. So might need to nerf it. We'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, I think this item is probably, of the 9, the most likely one to get nerfed before it goes live. So yeah, this item, I'm very happy with this item. I think it's very fun. Sona players, you're welcome. You can have a good time with this item, hopefully. And if you're like a Medrat player or like someone who really liked the old Moonstone non-enchanter builds, hey, this item can be good for you as well, as long as you have mana. So hopefully people have a good time with it. All right, now let's talk about Eternal Hunger. This item, or like this shape of item, I think is maybe the most requested item shape of all of these, specifically in that this is an AD item with Omnivamp. This is one of the items that is getting going really hard at the under-supported subclasses, because if you look at the AD caster fighters, right, this is like Kayn, Red Kayn specifically, Aatrox, Riven, Ambessa. These champions actually don't have that many items, right? They have Eclipse, and then they kind of share a bunch of items with the like regular old, they share a bunch of items with like the skirmishers and the divers. They're kind of their own subclass though, right? In that they have very different needs from the other, the other like skirmishers and divers that are out there, like in the fighter subclasses. And so this item I've made here to support a high damage build, right? It gives you haste. Note how this haste down here, this scales with bonus AD. So when you press R on Aatrox, you're getting a lot of haste from one item. And you'll note this isn't a ton of Omnivamp, right? This is just an obvious hole that's been kind of, I don't know if I would say neglected, but like kind of obviously missing in the system since the removal of Gorge-Ranker and the removal of Omnivamp from Eclipse, where these champions, I think, do feel like they really, really want an Omnivamp item, but they haven't had one in the system, right? This is why, for example, Ambessa has a lifesteal ratio on her ult passive to give her that vamp, is that Yellow really wanted her to have access to the ability to buy sustain from the item shop. Ultimately, if you're wondering, like, why is this item shaped the way that it is, it's here to support a full damage build. Why does it give tenacity? Because we don't want those champions, right, the Ambessas and the Rivens and the Aatrox of the world, we don't want them to have to feel like they have to buy Sterak's for tenacity. We want to give them another tenacity option, because those champions should have access to tenacity. They won't always be able to buy Mercs, and sometimes they might even need double tenacity, so maybe they need this and Mercs, but we don't want them to have to buy Sterak's, right? Sterak's is really intended to support the heavier fighters, especially Juggernauts, right? And so we wanted to have a tenacity option for these lighter fighters, especially for the casters who really, really, really do want to have access to Omnivamp as well. As for why this has a lower amount of Omnivamp baseline on the item and then a lot when you kill someone, and then also has a scaling passive, the main reason here is we didn't actually want people buying this first, right? Large amounts of Vamp very early on in the game can destabilize, like a lot of laning patterns. I'll talk about Hextech Gunblade later. If you haven't seen that, it is coming back. I'll talk about that when we get to that. But the general belief here is still that like large amounts of Vamp early on in the game are at a bare minimum very, very, very dangerous. And so this item is shaped to be more of a second or third item, right, where you can get a lot of haste from it later on in your build. Tenacity isn't normally something that you need on your first item, right? But by 2 or 3 items, you might really want it, when you're going into team fights and, potentially going for like side lane plays and stuff like that, where you might really need this tenacity in order to actually close that kill. That's what you're looking for. The other thing is, the reason why this has a takedown trigger is not just because I wanted to give you a lot of Omnivamp. I mean, that's part of it, right? I wanted to give you a situation in which you could have a lot of Omnivamp. But also, the other reason why it has a takedown trigger is because I wanted this item to synergize really well with Death's Dance, right? If you combo Eternal Hunger with Death's Dance, what you're going to get when you take someone down is you're going to cleanse your bleed pool, get a heal, get a ton of Omnivamp, and you'll have a ton of haste because Death's Dance is an AD skewed item, so you're getting a bunch of haste from the Famine here. So your next rotation after you get a takedown is going to heal you a ton, and then that'll let you theoretically snowball through the fight, and you have the tenacity from Eternal Hunger to hopefully help get that going. So all in all, the intent here is to synergize, like to build this, like to let this item give Omnivamp to the champions that really want it from the item system, and fill in a spot in their build that's kind of missing to make it so that Sterak's is a little less necessary because of the tenacity there, and just generally give a more damage-oriented AD caster fighter build path that makes sense for them. In general, I really like the way that this item feels like it rewards a high damage build path, right? Because if you build something like like a 40 AD fighter item, like a cleaver or something like that, you're giving up potential value on this famine passive of like you're going to get less haste from it. And so items like Eclipse and like Death's Dance and like Maw, they're higher on AD and don't offer as many defenses as say like a cleaver or I don't know, like a Sterex gauge or whatever, should be more appealing, right? This is all in support of a more damage-oriented build path for the Rivens and the Aatroxes of the world, right? And so that's what we're looking for out of this item, and I hope people enjoy it. So yeah, I think very possible this item needs some tuning, but I'm not confident that 5% Omnivamp is the right amount. Could be more, could be less. I'm not honestly sure about that. That's very hard to tell. But yeah, hopefully this item is cool for people. Trying to think if there's anything worth talking about. Oh, origin of this item. It's an interesting one. This item is kind of a cobbled together, like Frankenstein, combo of a couple of different prototypes. I had a takedown trigger for a while. I had an Omnivamp item for a while. I had a tenacity item for a while, and I had this AD scaling haste for a while on an item. But those were all separate prototypes. I tried a lot of different fighter prototypes. In fact, I had 3 of them in the build at the same time at one point. But ultimately, the reason why I ended up with all of these things kind of combined into one was because it just hits all the goals that we want of like supporting the subclasses and all that, right? Like I had a fighter item that was intended for divers, but diver itemization, right? Like the Vi's and the the Wukongs of the world, they're not really hurting for items. And so even though I think that item was like, it was fine, like the version of it that had a takedown trigger that gave Omnivamp, it was totally fine. But it just wasn't really needed for the diver class, and so I think repurposing that for the caster fighters made a little more sense. So ultimately, I still think I had some cool items, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some of those other concepts that I prototyped out for fighters in the future. But this is the item that like kind of ended up coming together and like really, really, really working out. Okay, now let's talk about Actualizer. And I'm sure this will be a interesting item for some people. I want to note, even though this is a lost chapter item, it's not really intended to be a first item. In fact, I expect first item Actualizer to be quite bad for, I think, most champions, maybe all champions that can buy it. It's an active. The first active we've made in a long time. 5 years, maybe? It's been a while. It's the first active we've made since the Mythics were introduced, right? And it's also one of very few actives that has an actual downside, right? The old Stoneblade, the original Stoneblade had a downside of reducing your damage. Zonia's technically has the downside of like sort of stunning you, right? Obviously that's like kind of a trade-off with the active, but it has a literal downside, right? For 8 seconds, you double your mana costs, but you get a massive amount of ability damage, shielding, and healing, and you get cooldown. Essentially, your cooldowns go faster. You might recognize this from Arena. It's actually more mana costs and increased ability damage, shielding, and shielding is actually from an augment in Arena called Overflow. If you've never seen it before. Ultimately, I got this idea because I tried a lot of different mage items. I really did experiment a lot. I tried some battle mage items. I tried some traditional control mage items. I tried some artillery mage items. I tried some burst mage items. I really tried a lot of different things. And really, a lot of the prototypes I was trying really just didn't feel like they were working, except for the battle mage item. That one might, that prototype might see the light of day again, because that one was actually pretty cool, I think. But most of my prototypes weren't working that well, and we didn't really want to make a battle mage item, because the battle mage itemization currently is like fine, right? We wanted to make an item that was a little bit more broadly appealing, or serving a less served class, like a less served subclass, right? So we kind of went through the different build paths in the in the mage system, and the conclusion was like, well, mana builds, like mana isn't really rewarded, right? Like there's a mana build path, which is like the traditional version of that is like Roa Seraphs. There's also like Seraphs plus other lost chapter items as well, though that's obviously a lot less popular. But mana isn't really something that you can reward later on in your build very easily, or like manipulate or scale with very later on in your build very easily. But this item can, because one of the things I want to note here is that this percentage scales with mana. It has a base too, right? But the more mana you have, the more ability damage, shielding, and healing you get, right? So if you go for a full mana build, like you do Roa Seraph's Actualizer, or you do like, Malignant Seraph's Actualizer, or Blackfire Seraph's Actualizer, whatever, right? You do a big mana build, you get a lot of damage, and shielding and healing, of course, during this 8-second window. Now, a couple of questions to answer here I'm sure people have is like, number one, why does it make your cooldowns tick faster? Number two, why is this an active? the first version of this prototype that I made was not inactive. It was just permanently on. I considered making it a toggle, but toggles are kind of tough for most players to use. They're very complicated, and I don't think they're very satisfying for most players either. So I felt like I should either make it a passive or make it an active. That's kind of I don't think the toggle version on this particular thing is particularly interesting, because especially a toggle version of this item would be like you'd need to like toggle it on and off at different wave clear breakpoints and stuff like that, and I'd be like I don't like that, right? Anyway, point I'm getting at is the first version was passive, and the end result of that was people were like, it's very cool in concept, but the actual reality is when you buy the item, you just have to base a lot, because you might not think this, right? A lot of people think like, oh, you buy one mana item and your mana just goes away. It's a complete non-factor. Double mana cost, who cares? Double mana cost is a lot of mana. Like, you will with this item. Like, there will be people who themselves. I'm actually really, by the way, looking forward to the first time I see a clip of a Zoe picking up this item as a bubble, activating it, and then being unable to cast their spells. If you have a clip of that happening in a real game of League of Legends, please send it to me, because I want to watch it and I want to laugh, because I'm so excited for that to happen. Anyway, double your mana cost is a lot of extra mana. That was the feedback I got immediately, was people were like, this is very cool, I want to buy it, but it's not fun to use because I'm constantly basing. I'm clearing waves, spending double mana, I'm trying to like hold a side wave, I'm spending double mana, I have to base. So I decided, okay, look, the passive version is just not fun to work with unless I lower the mana cost increase. And if I lower the mana cost increase to like say 50% increase instead of 100, then number one, the item is less cool. Number two, the item has to be less powerful, which also makes it less cool. And number three, it's probably just not a very interesting item, and it doesn't actually reward you that much for building more mana, even if I make it scale with mana, right? Like all the reward would be on the mana scaling instead of being on all the other stuff. Anyway, so I tried an active version. And I tried a number of different like durations, cooldowns, and stuff. And the reason why I added the basic ability cooldowns progress faster was that the original version, where it was just the extra damage and double mana cost, was like, oh, people would buy it on LeBlanc just to make them better at one-shotting people. And it was like basically just a burst mage item. Now, I actually don't have any problem with burst mages buying this, to be clear. But I don't want them to buy it only to one-shots people, right? Like I want other items to be better at one-shotting, right? It's like if this item is better at just like being a generic one-shot item, actually the cooldown probably needs to be higher for what it's worth. 60 seconds is probably too short. I probably need to nerf that. Anyway, but if this item is generically better for like LeBlanc than say like Shadow Flame, I think that would be bad, right? Like that's kind of weird if it's now, oh, every time I play LeBlanc I have to activate this item before I do my combo to kill someone in one shot. I don't really like that very much. Anyway, so I put the cooldown reduction on it, and the cool thing about this that people were then doing with some burst champions was that, or like some burst mages, was they were actually trying to get enough haste with this cooldown refund to actually cycle their cooldowns twice during the window, right? Like there were some people who were playing like Malignant's Lux with this item, and I think Horizon Focus. I don't remember the exact details of their build, but where they would like activate the item, throw their combo, and then before the item ran out, they could get another combo out, which could then let them like cycle multiple burst combos, which I think is really cool, right? Like for like Vagar, for example, that's really, really fun. And also champions that just have like one lower cooldown, like Vagar, it's obviously like pretty nice on to like, even if, it doesn't necessarily give you 2 Vagar cages, it'll get you to your next cage sooner, and you'll get to spam a bunch of Qs on Vagar, which is cool, right? So overall, I've been actually really happy with this item. I do think it's one of the riskier items for sure. It does create sequencing issues potentially. I will note that it reduces your cooldowns. It doesn't give you CDR. So if you use an ability before you use this item, the cooldown refunding will still work on the items that are not the cooldowns that were already on cooldown. So ultimately, the goal here is just like filling out the mana system a little bit more, giving players, like mage players, a new tool to optimize around, because I think that's something that's particularly for mage players, something that they could definitely use, and a new interesting way to play, to think about your builds, especially in relation to mana, right? One thing I want to do over time, and this is not, this is just one step, right? Don't take this as like, oh, we're like for sure moving in this direction. But my personal take is I would really like to move in a direction where people don't see mana as strictly a downside, but there's like, oh, well, having mana lets me do this as well, right? Like an actualizer is kind of like one of the things that comes with that, right? Like, if we had Actualizer and Seraphs and like 2 other items that like actually rewarded you for having mana and did things like that, I think maybe that would actually make mana feel like more of a compelling and interesting resource rather than just like a mandatory tax. I must buy a mana item first because I'm a mana mage. And I think that's cool. Like that we can actually build out systems that actually reward you for indexing into mana. Also, if you're wondering how this item interacts with non-mana champions, if you do not have mana, you cannot use this item. You cannot activate it. You can buy it, just like you can buy any mana item on, say, Vlad, but you cannot activate this item. So you cannot get the base damage, shielding and healing, and the cooldown recovery unless you have mana, because the item is not activatable because it empowers your mana. If you don't have mana, you can't empower your mana. So that's how it works. I'm very proud of this one. Hopefully people enjoy this. Like I said, I know a lot of people really, really like actives and have been looking for them. This is an active. It is a steroid, which I know is not exactly what everyone's looking for, but it's not a spell per se, right? It's just like a self buff. But hopefully people enjoy it. So hope you like this one if you are a active item enjoyer. And also remember, if you see a Zoe pick up this item active and use it and not have enough mana to cast their spells, please send it to me because I think that's super funny to think about. Haven't seen that in playtest yet, but people don't really play Zoe in our playtests very much, so not surprising. Okay, now let's talk about Protoplasm Harness. Some people watching this video may be thinking this item looks a little familiar. If you've played Wild Rift, you may have seen an item called Mantle of the 12th Hour that is pretty similar to this one. Yes, this is me borrowing item ideas from myself of the past. So I made an item, a lifeline tank item that healed you over time and gave you, move speed, and Wild Rift gives tenacity, it gives slow resistance, a lot of slow resistance. This version gives tenacity. But I made an item very similar to this in Wild Rift, and so I brought this item, I ported a version of this, and then I've done a number of changes, right? It's not exactly the same. This is a more, I would say a more modern take and a more PC League forward take on what a tank lifeline item looks like. You'll note here, there is a heal here that scales with level, bonus armor, and bonus MR, and you gain some maximum health. This item is very interesting because it has some hoops that it needs to jump through, right? Grievous Wounds is one of the big hoops here, right? Where I give you this maximum health because this is unaffected by Grievous Wounds, of course, right? So if it turns out the item is overly counted by Grievous, I can push some of the heal value into this max health that you get when the thing triggers. But you heal, a fairly sizable chunk if you're a normal tank over 5 seconds. And you get this, size, move speed, tenacity. So what's the point of this item? Why make this item? Well, the original goal for Mantle when I made it in Wild Rift was, hey, a lot of tank players get to these points in fights where they get really low and it feels kind of doomed for one, and that's not very interesting for them. Like they just like, oh, I got to 1/3 HP. I know that I'm just deterministically dead from here. And I think being able to, giving tanks a chance to turn the tables on people is fun for one. For two, it gives a really clear decision point, especially for like less experienced tank players. This item gives you a very clear like, okay, make a decision. As a tank, you got low. Are you going to commit to this play, right? Like say you're in a team fight, like do you want to go forward? Do you want to try and get one more CC spell on, their front line or their back line or whatever? Or do you want to try and retreat, try to save your life, right? It gives you that tenacity, that movement speed in order to give you the agency to make that decision, right? Like you're Scion, you ult into the fight and, your Q gets canceled and you're getting bursted down to the enemy team. Your lifeline pops off of this item and you get the window of opportunity to make a choice. That is what this item was originally designed for in Wild Rift. And I felt like we could have that item in League. However, I took a little bit of a different take on it. The reason why it scales with bonus armor and bonus MR is that I think our current tank item offerings, we've indexed over the past couple of years a little bit harder, or a little bit too hard in my opinion, into favoring the like health stacking tanks over the resistance stacking tanks, right? I think we've indexed a little bit too hard into the Heartsteel builds and health favored builds over builds that get a lot of resistances, right? I want champions like Malphite and Rammus to feel good about their builds. And so this item, because it scales very well with bonus armor and MR, currently, by the way, the bonus armor and MR scalings are both 250%, I think. So like if you have, 200 bonus armor, that's a lot of healing, right? You get 200 bonus armor, 100 bonus MR. That's getting multiplied by 2.5. So, add that to the level scaling. The level scaling caps at 400, as you can see here, because this screenshot was taken when I had no bonus armor and MR. You can heal a lot off this item, like quite a lot. And by the way, for the Cassante players out there, it tracks your bonus armor and MR, not your current state if you're all out. So this item is particularly exciting for Cassante because when you ult someone, you take some damage, and then this item usually is going to trigger when you're in all out form. Pretty awesome for Cassante. Pretty awesome for Rammus because of his W. Fun for Leona because of her W. Fun for a lot of the champions that have resistance multipliers, like Malphite, for example. Some of the resistance multipliers, of course, won't be up when this item's up, like Sejuani passive, for example. Pretty hard to get Sejuani passive to be on when this thing pops. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. But in general, I wanted this item to do a couple of things. Number one, support some of these resistance builds out there. Number two, actually be like a fun item for tanks to use, especially in team fights, to like allow them to get some agency around, do they want to commit, do they want to leave? Especially giving tanks the ability to like actually like hard commit to fights initially, but not be guaranteed to die when they do that. I think that's like one of the least fun parts of playing tanks is that there's a lot of games where you'll run it, you'll go into and like, oh, I guess it's my job to die. It's fine that like gameplay wise that happens, but I think giving them an item, especially as like a somewhat luxury item, and for some champions, that can help them get away from that situation and like not not die in some situations where they otherwise would just be straight dead. I think that's really good, and it's really fun. So currently, I've buffed this item a lot. We haven't tested it much. This is like the most recent iteration that I actually haven't bought this version at all. Like I just cut like 200 gold off the price, and I think I buffed this space heal as well. I don't remember. Anyway, another thing I wanted to do was introduce other haste options into the tank system. Something I've been noting recently is that like in Season 14, well, I didn't notice this part recently. In Season 14, I trimmed a lot of haste out of the tank system. We've added a little bit back, like, adding haste onto Bomby Cinder, for example. But I still think that there aren't great build paths to get as much haste as I would like for tanks. Like, I think there should be a build path for, like, Zac, for example, to get a lot of haste. And that doesn't currently exist. So I'm trying to bring back some, like, 15, maybe 20 haste items into the game. Like, one of the things I might do is actually make this thing a little bit more expensive and put 20 haste on it. Like, maybe up, like, 100 gold, 5 more haste, if we think it's balanced. Maybe up, like, 200 gold, add 5 more haste, if we think it's less balanced. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm trying to support more haste builds. And this is an item that kind of makes sense to have haste on it as well, right? Because it's like an item that says, hey, when you get low, you get tankier, you get to heal. Giving you haste means that you'll, more likely to get a full rotation of your spells when you pop the lifeline effect. So pretty cool item, hopefully. I personally do like it a lot. And again, Cassante players, try this out. I promise, it'll be a lot of fun. Get this thing like third item. I will note that this item probably isn't very good in the second slot on most champions, or at least, well, I did buff the base value. Maybe it's better now. Well, the previous versions we were testing were like, just mathematically, just like in terms of EHP they were giving you, just weren't that good in second item. Since a lot of the buffs that I've done to this item, I've buffed it a few times in a row now. Maybe it's better second item, and maybe it'd be worth building there. But yeah, I'm not sure how this goes. Anyway, yeah, this is one that we haven't tested, too extensively on the current tuning, so I can't really speak too much to that. But hopefully it'll be good. Hopefully it'll be good in, at least in the third slot, maybe fourth. Obviously has some really powerful synergy with Jackshow because Jackshow multiplies your resistances. So another thing this item does that I really like also is it gives tanks more gold scaling, which is something I always really like is when tanks that are ahead can actually get really tanky in ways that are not like immediately countered by like the traditional tank counters, which is like percent pen, because this turns your resistances into healing effectively, right? So unless they have grievous wounds and percent pen, if you're a really ahead tank, you could take advantage of this item to say like, well, no, you have to have every counter, which I think is cool. So yeah, let's talk about another item. The Bandle Pipes. This is the other tank item. This one's a support tank item targeted at tank supports like, say, Braum, Tahm Kench, maybe Leona, maybe Alistar, maybe Taric. I don't know. Taric's probably Taric's probably not buying this, let's be honest. Anyway, so this is an item that has the same build path as Locket, but it has less armor, less MR, more haste. In exchange, what you're getting is when you slow or immobilize an enemy, you play the bagpipes. this, by the way, I recommend trying it out. You'll have a good time. And it has a melee range split on this duration. While you have the buff aura, I need to change the tooltip here. Buff aura is definitely not what I should say. Maybe the song aura or like the pipe aura. I don't know. I got to change the tooltip on this one for sure. Anyway, you get a small amount of movement speed, which, you know, mostly is just nominally there to help you like re-trigger it or exit if you really need to exit the fight. And you get an AoE, a large AoE. It's 900 radius AoE that gives 30% attack speed to all nearby allies. So why this item, right? What's this item for? Well, the thing that I noticed with tank supports was they have a number of outputs, right? They have single target protection, Knight's Vow. They have AoE protection from Locket. And sort of redemption. Although, actually it changed redemption. I haven't, I'll get to that later, hopefully. I actually don't think I wrote that one down. Whatever. And they have mobility, that's Trailblazer. And they have like an offensive, like ult skewed thing, Zeke's. I'll talk more about Zeke's later. But they don't really have anything that's like, my allies are stronger in the same way that enchanters have, you know, like half their items, right? That make their allies stronger in some way. And so that was one of the places I wanted to play in. I did have a couple of other prototypes I won't talk about because I think that space could really work. But this is the space I ended up in where when I decided to scrap some of the other prototypes that I was working on, where I said, okay, what's a cool offensive output, you know, offensive team, like team scaling output that I could give? And the conclusion I came to was like, well, actually, some of these tanks really like attack speed, right? Braum and Tahm Kench, of course, especially, right? But even Alistar with his E and Leona with her Q actually care a little bit about attack speed. And so the answer I was looking for was like, oh, I think I should give it attack speed aura of some kind. But attack speed aura by itself is just kind of boring, right? It's flat. It's not that exciting. And I really wanted to do a version that was a little bit more punched up, a little bit more interesting for these tank supports. So I iterated through a number of different prototypes, including an active version, which I didn't think was very good. But I had a bunch of different prototypes. I had a version where you just needed to stand near an enemy for a while, a version where you needed to immobilize, a bunch of different triggers. And the end conclusion here was just like, you know what? Slowing and immobilizing just works. It works great. Let's just do that. Ended up with a simple trigger. And note there is no cooldown on triggering this. The duration and the amount of attack speed are both ranged melee split because even though I really would love for this item to be good on Bard and Thresh, the scary thing here is that we don't really want this to be an item that is optimally bought on like Lulu and Janna, where they buy this thing combined with Ardent Sensor and they just permanently buff their ally to get a ton of attack speed, and that like alleviates the AD carries need to get AS. If that's a like strategy that is rarely seen and is good sometimes, I'm fine with that, but I don't want that to be the standard way this item is used. And so unfortunately, I felt like I had to penalize ranged, even though I think it would be really cool if Bard and Thresh bought this thing. But ultimately, if you're a melee, it's very easy to keep this thing up because you get the buff for 8 seconds. Ranged champions get it for 4, so they have to be CCing people a lot more frequently. But like I said, there's no cooldown on this. You can keep this aura up indefinitely. And the idea is that this item will be at its best, at its most exciting when you have multiple attackers on your team, right? Your Braum and your AD carry is Jinx, and your jungler is Rek'Sai, and your top laner is Jax, and your mid laner is Azir too. Okay, that one's probably not necessary. But like, there should obviously be, like, there should be games where this item is just clearly amazing because it's not that uncommon that you have an attack-based jungler. And it's also not that uncommon that you have an attack-based top laner, right? There's a lot of both of those. And a lot of AD carries like attack speed a lot as well. So there should be some games where this item is clearly just going to be really powerful in team fights because you're going to get value on a bunch of different champions on this item. But there should also be games where it's not as good, right? Like you're playing Braum, but your AD carry is Ezreal, who doesn't care as much about attack speed, and your jungler is Zyra, and your top laner is... Who's your top laner? I don't know, Yorick, who's not going to team fight with you, or whatever. Or, I don't know, like... who's a top laner that doesn't care at all about attack speed? Riven. Doesn't care about attack speed. Or Aatrox. Aatrox probably a better example. Your top laner is Aatrox, right? The item is obviously not good there. So this is another case where we're trying to introduce a little bit of depth to the item system, where now, as a tank support, you can more deeply consider, you can get win rate out of more deeply considering your team comp and whether getting more attack speed on your team is actually a good path to victory. And that should be fun. Hopefully, looking at those items and considering like, is this a Vandal Pipes game? Is it time to lay down the pipes? Like I said, you got to listen to this one. Check out the sound effects on the PBE. Anyway, the goal here was basically just like giving a new, different item. Also, you'll note this item has more haste than Locket. It's kind of to differentiate it. And I also wanted to have more haste because that makes it easier to keep up your slows and immobilizes. Because like obviously like some of the champions, it's a little bit harder. Say like Alistar, who has longer cooldown on his stuff, and like Braum, whose Q is not guaranteed by any means, right? And like his passive is like not guaranteed either. So ultimately, the goal here is cool AoE AS aura item that should be situationally really, really good sometimes. Really good on some of the champions that care about attack speed, right? Like the Brahms and the Tom Kenches. There were some people that were looking at, they were buying this on Tom Kench and having a really good time. Looked pretty fun. I personally haven't done that, but you just like lick someone and then you get 30% AS. You just kind of start smacking them. Pretty fun on the Kench, so I recommend that. Watley, if you're out there, try it out. Might be fun. This item, I'm looking forward to seeing how this item goes. And I actually have been thinking like this item may actually affect how you draft in pro play, right? Because building your comp to have a bunch of auto attackers on it and a tank support now actually may be like something that you want to do with your composition when you're in an organized play setting. So that could be cool as well. So I'm kind of looking forward to how this thing optimizes out. And like I said, there are some redemption changes. I'll talk about those later. So I don't really think tank supports will be going redemption anymore. This item, I think, is the one that I personally am most interested in. This build path might need to change. I think this build path is so bad, but it's hard because we don't have the right components to make a better version of this. So this is an AP fighter item. It is a Sheen item. And this item has a longer history than the others because the first prototype for this item didn't come from this season. So I've told this story publicly of how I designed the items for Season 14 Split 2. So the items I actually ended up shipping were Blackfire Torch, Overlord's Bloodmail, and Faded Ashes. And I've told the story of how I made them, like those items. Basically, because it was a really short timeline project, what I did was I wrote up a list of like, here are item spaces that I think are good to fill, right? This is stuff like AP, Lost Chapter item for sustained DPS, right? That would eventually become Blackfire Torch, right? So I wrote up a bunch of spaces, I think like 14 or 15 of them, and I sent them to my boss at the time and the lead gameplay lead at the time, which was Froxon, still is lead gameplay lead. So I sent them to Soul Crushed and Froxon, and I said, hey, could you guys give me your prioritization list? Like tell me stack rank these, like basically 1 through whatever it was. Like just tell me which one of these you think are most worth investigating. So they like stack ranked them. They said like, oh, these are the ones we think are most valuable to least valuable. And then the top 8 I implemented prototypes for, and I ruthlessly culled down the prototypes very quickly. I iterated very quickly. I culled prototypes very quickly, and eventually ended up with 3 items that shipped, right? I've told that story before. The part of the story that I haven't told before is that there was a 4th item that almost made it. I think if I'd had a week or 2 more time, I could have shipped another item. It was called Spellweaver's Soul, was my prototype name. And it was an item that had a stat line like this. The passives were different. It had 2 passives. It was based upon the old masteries, if people are familiar with them, where there was a mastery called Spellweaving and a mastery called Blade Weaving. One of them gave you increased attack damage when you hit enemies with spells, and one of them gave you increased spell damage when you hit enemies with attacks. And I thought that was really cool. And it was particularly nice to support some champions like, say, like Elise and Lee Sin, right? Because they were generic, right? These were masteries back in the day. And I thought that was a really cool space to play in, because when you look at the AP fighter system in particular, there's attack payouts, right? There's Lichbane and there's Nashers, and there's spell payouts, basically all of their items for the most part. But there's not really anything that plays in that space between, right? Aside from Lichbane, sort of, right? Which says like cast a spell and then attack. But Lichbane isn't really accessible to most of the actual AP fighters we have in the game, right? It's like a full damage item. Gwen can buy it, right? Because she's the light fighter of the AP fighter system, right? And she can actually afford to buy an item that's all damage. But most of the AP fighters can't really afford to buy an actual full damage item that has no defenses on it, right? Like Mordekaiser really struggles to buy an item with no defenses and not much in the way of base damage, right? Buying Lichbane, right? Lichbane, as an example, is basically committing to a full damage build. If you buy Lichbane on Diana, you're not playing Fighter Diana, right? You're playing Assassin Diana, right? The Lichbane Diana builds can't really be fighter builds. Diana has both builds, right? But she is for sure an AP fighter, right? So, I made that item originally like the Spellweaving Blade Weaving item, and I called it Spellweaver's Soul. And like I said, I felt like I was close in 2024. I guess that's the last year at this point, like a year and a half ago. But I had to go work on what would eventually become feats, and so I didn't have time to finish it. And so that item ended up getting scrapped. But I didn't forget. It was a really like high fantasy item. I felt like it was really cool that it would sort of like tie the attack and spells together, like attacking and casting spells together for some of these AP fighters. I thought that was really cool. And so I kept thinking about it. I kept talking to other designers about it. And one of the conclusions I came to was like, actually, this should just be a Sheen item, right? Like Sheen already does what I want here, which is tie together casting spells and attacking a lot. So when I got this project, the literal first item I implemented was a Sheen version of Spellweaver's Soul. Now, very brief aside here. I haven't talked about the playtest names. Yellow actually gave me, Riot Yellow, if you don't know him, he's the designer who made, he's a champion designer who made Mbessa and Yunara. He actually very kindly saved me a bunch of time by making some playtest icons. He made them by taking current items and just like flipping them upside down or whatever and changing the color palette. And then coming up with ridiculous names for them. So if people are interested in those, I could maybe make another video about that. That could be funny. But he called it Scepter of Bonking, which was a great name. And that's the name that's actually in the, for this item, that's actually in the dev video, if you watch that. If you didn't watch it, then this item used to be called Scepter of Bonking. But it was Scepter of Bonking and then in parentheses, Spellweaver's Soul 2. Because it was a redux on my old Spellweaver's Soul prototype. And so it was the first item I implemented. And the original version that I put in was Spellblade, right? After you use an ability, you get bonus magic damage on your next attack. And the original version, what it did was when you Spellbladed something, it would mark them. And when you hit that person, like hit that mark with a spell damage, it would detonate the mark, give you movement speed, do bonus damage. And that worked. It was really functional. It actually just worked. It was particularly fun on Mordekaiser because with Mordekaiser, because his passive is spell damage, once you triggered your passive on someone, every time you would sheen, it would instantly pop the mark on the enemy and then give you the speed, which was pretty cool. So there were some cool things about that. Anyway, and it was like that for a number of months. However, when we got close to locking it down, when we were doing our like pre-lock meeting at one point, Axis, who was the stakeholder on the design stakeholder on the project, was like, okay, he was looking at Scepter of Bonking, said, okay, this item is 100% shippable, and I think it's even good. But you haven't really iterated on this. You haven't really tried much. Like what is a great, like, what is it, like, what if you could push it? Like, what does a really cool version of this look like? I said, okay. I don't know what that looks like, so let me think about it. So I left that meeting, and I remember I sat with some of the guys from GAT for like 2 hours, and I just was talking, like workshopping ideas, not just on Scepter Bonk, on a bunch of items. And one of the ideas came from, I think it came from Electress, actually. I don't remember for sure. I think it was Electress's idea. It was like, what about on hits? Is there something could you mess with on hits with this item? And that like this like spark, like this made this connection in my brain. I was like, wait a second. One of the things we do with AP fighters is we give them attack payouts, right? Because AD fighters, some of them have attack payouts anyway, but they don't need them because AD scales your auto attacks already. So they're already encouraged to auto attack because they are buying AD. With a lot of our AP fighters, right, not the Singed and the Rumbles exactly, but like a lot of our AP fighters, right, the Mordekaisers, the Gwens, the Dianas, the Volibears, the Tomkenches, right? A lot of our AP fighters, we give them an attack payout because it's really good for the pattern of these fighters of like, you have a payout that's on your auto attack, therefore, you can't be ignored when your cooldowns are down. You're not entirely cooldown gated, right? That's really, really, really good and useful for fighter patterns for a number of different reasons. But that's one of the things we do, right? And so the thing that ended up being really good here was This on-hit synergy, literally just doubling your on-hits, just like Rage Blade, just kind of works for these AP fighters, right? There's some really cool synergies, right? Volibear gets to double stack his passive, or apply his passive twice if it's already stacked. Diana gets to skip one hit towards her passive. Gwen gets an additional stack of her Q and the damage from her passive. Mordekaiser gets to deal his damage. By the way, Mordekaiser passive is 40% AP on hit. It is crazy ratio. And gets an extra stack if you're hitting a champion. That might not be working on the PB. I had a bug fix for that. So if you try that on the PB, literally, I might need to fix that still. So don't assume that one works. The rest of the stuff should work. But like you see the point I'm getting at here, right? It's like we give these AP fighters attack like on hit effects, like in their kits, because we want them to attack. And we want to give them an attack payout so that they actually have a reason to be, or they have a way that they're threatening outside of their spell cooldowns, right? And so this synergy ended up, like, I put this in, and it was immediately people were like, oh my god, this is so cool. I'm having so much fun playing, Mordekaiser or Gwen or Diana or whatever playing this. By the way, Tom Kench, this is another one for Watley. Auberon in a test last week was playing Tom Kench, and he was going Q with Dusk and Dawn, and then he auto-attacked once, and then applies 2 stacks of passive, and you can just eat them. So Q auto-eat is a new combo with this item. So try that one out if you're a big Tom Kench player, and hope you enjoy that one. But this item just has like so many natural synergies, and doubling on hits, of course, is just super cool. In fact, one of the things that we were looking at that this might do is it actually might make a viable AP fighter Jax build, for example, right? Because it lets Jax skip forward in his passive and on his ult passive and stuff. It's like really, really cool, and actually might be a healthier version of an AP Jax build that isn't just about one-shotting waves and one-shotting champs and all that, right? So that could actually be like a fighter AP Jax build, which could be really cool. Anyway, so I'm really happy with this item. I think it does some really, really cool stuff, and it opens up future design space for AP fighters to potentially play in, right? If you ever heard me talk about AP fighters before, you'll know that, like, especially in the past, like pre-Gwen especially, was like, it's kind of this vicious cycle of, well, we don't have good AP fighter itemization, so champion designers don't want to make AP fighters, and then people working on items don't want to make AP fighter items because we didn't have enough of them to make it worth it. It's like, but I think over the years we've kind of resolved this. Like Volibear kind of backdoored into being an AP fighter. We made Gwen. We have some of these champions from the olden days that kind of fit into the AP fighter archetype, like Diana and Tom Kench and all that. So I'm really happy with this item. I do want to. I don't know if I'll have time exactly, but before the season ships, but I want to enable lane fighter Diana. There's some problems with that, like for example mana. Like her mana limitations are pretty rough for lane. So I want to do some things to enable more fighter builds, like even Echo. Like I've been talking with August about maybe enabling a fightery Echo build, not literally tank Echo. Like don't get too upset, but like a fightery Echo build, right? Like Dusk and Dawn into like Riftmaker could be cool, right? But anyway. So we were talking about, opening up some champions into some more fightery builds potentially that could maybe have that, especially now that this item exists to support those kinds of things. And yeah, I think this item will be pretty fun to play with. I highly recommend it. It is pretty cool. And also, something to note is that your hands will be different color because it's Dusk and Dawn. It's kind of a duality theme here. Your hands are actually different colors when you have the sheen ready. So check that out on the PB. Should be fun. And I might need to redo this build path, so we'll see about that. Okay, so now that's all of the new items. Let's talk about the returning items. And I want to be clear, I'm going to spend less time talking about these, not necessarily because I'm like, because these are less important or anything like that, but mainly because I didn't do these 2 returning items. These 2 returning items were done by Axes. So, Gunblade. This one's dangerous, right? I want to establish right off the bat that I think this is this is another item we're taking a risk on, right? It could be that we end up regretting re-adding Gunblade. It's a possibility that we're willing to accept. However, Axis believes, generally some people believe that this item can do some really good things for the system, particularly for Katarina, right? Like one of the things that's like, I don't think anyone who, looks at Katarina's builds or is familiar with Katarina, is going to be surprised by this, but it's like, yeah, the builds that, like the things that we've had to do to Katarina to make her builds work post Gunblade, it's like, generally, I think we don't really look upon those super favorably of like how those have affected the champion over time and like how her builds have changed. And especially Katarina, I think like we look at this item and say like this item is, in some ways good for her. Now I'm pretty concerned personally about having a really, really powerful vamp spike for these champions, right? Especially Akali. The thing to note here is that this active is a much longer cooldown than the slow is a lot lower magnitude. So this is not the same as the old Gunblade where Akali is rolling up on every single wave, gunblading you, and then just like, all-inning you randomly or like guaranteed to land her E. The slow is less powerful, and it's a much longer cooldown. So it's not going to be nearly as rough in terms of like gameplay removal. But I personally am still pretty concerned about the Vamp. We'll see how that plays out. Maybe that it just had maybe it needs to have less Vamp, right? Maybe that's okay. Maybe the Vamp needs to scale with level. Who knows, right? But the idea here is that this is able to support certain types of builds that are hard for us to support in the current game, particularly these dual scaling champions. Getting side lane sustained so that it's easier for, say, like a Katarina to win without actually having to like pentakill people, right? To relieve some of the stress on some of our systems in some ways for some of these champions. Of course, also, it's great nostalgia, right? Like I'm sure lots of people will be very excited to see Gunblade back. Yeah, I mean, this is an item that we're willing to try. Not sure the tuning is right. This is like pretty cheap for the Gunblade. We'll see how this works out, but yeah, I'm kind of interested to see how this one plays out, and we'll see how it goes. The other returning item is Stormrazor. This one's kind of like we took a pass on like some of the items that had been removed over the years. It was like, well, this one's probably kind of harmless, right? It's like this version of it specifically is probably overtuned, probably needs to be nerfed, but we have an item that gives AD and attack speed. This is a very light amount of attack speed, right? It's really not that much, right? If you want to level out attack speed, right, Stormrazor's not going to be enough for you on its own, right? It's like 20%. So the idea here is like, this is just a low risk item that like can help support certain builds that otherwise would have a hard time existing, right? Like there are some cool things you can do with this item, right? Like some people really like the movement speed. Some champions like Jhin, for example, can do like the energized builds, which can be really, really fun and really exciting and, potentially even really good situationally for those types of champions. And so it's just another, hey, here's a new first item AD carry option. It's probably not going to be that popular if it's properly tuned. It's probably not going to outperform Yuntal most of the time would be our expectations if the item is tuned correctly. But additional option, we're more willing to accept lower pick rate items these days. And that was one of the reasons why it was removed, was that it's a relatively narrow item that like really isn't that appealing to very many champions. And like it's generally going to be outperformed by other, similar AD carry items. So because we're more willing to accept those a little bit more narrow items, this item is coming back. So here's Stormrazor. And as a bonus, I just happen to have this screenshot. I don't have a screenshot of every single reworked item, but I do have this one, that I took yesterday, or no, I made this today. Oh, well, whatever. I made this at work today. Anyway, doesn't matter. This is the new Echoes of Helia. And you will note it is very similar to the old Athenes. So Echoes of Helia was designed as sort of like a modern Athenes, as being more enchanter-centric rather than like straddling the space between the enchanter and mage space, right? Because the original Athenes, of course, asks you to deal damage, right? A lot of enchanters have a hard time dealing much meaningful damage. That, of course, can cause some problems, right? With the structure of the item where it asks you to, both deal damage and also have heals and shields, right? But the old Athenes, ultimately, at the end of the day, the effect was just fun, right? Like, it ultimately was just a fun item and a much more, like, enjoyed item, whereas, like, the current Echoes of Helia on live is objectively, one of the most powerful enchanter items, but people don't nearly, like, buy it nearly at the rate that we would expect given its level of power, because a lot of it's, like, distributed, kind of, like, very hard to notice power, even given that it has multiple missiles that it's firing every single time you trigger it. It's just like very low visibility, like low appreciability power. It has to be like all base values so that you have to buy it first, and doesn't scale because you can't really like we don't really have the levers to make it scale. It's just like the modern Echoes of Helia. I'm sure there will be some people that will miss it, but it's just a very low appreciability item. Whereas this thing, because it can give very big chunks of healing, is really fun to play with. And this is something like I put in this rework. I went to play it. I played a game on Carmen. I was like, nope, this thing is like, it's still really fun. And like I said, it kind of straddles the space between mage and enchanter, and we've done a few different things here to help support that space. Also, the redemption change helps that as well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the thought process here is like, this is just a more fun item, and you know, will Sona and Milio need to find a new item to buy? You know, in the percent, like the whatever percentage of their game they're buying the live echoes. Maybe they'll move to the new one, though I don't really expect them to. Maybe Sona might want this one, but I don't really think she usually will buy this because she's usually not doing that much damage. But anyway, point I'm getting at here is like the expectations. This is just a more fun item, and it's not like the live echoes is so popular that like removing it from a few champions is going to be super problematic. I don't think. The reality is we don't like we were a little afraid of like what happens if we allow you to have both this echoes and the old echoes at the same time because they're kind of like doing a lot of similar things, and there was like a self-perpetuating potential issue there where it was like they could cycle with, they could stack, like they could apply off each other, and that was going to be a hard problem to solve. So you're getting the new echoes as the old Athene's passive, and this is the like I don't know if this is tuned correctly. It seemed fine in tests. Maybe it's overtuned, maybe it's undertuned. I don't know. If you're wondering specifically about the old Athene's stat line of having MR on it, it was something I heavily considered, but I didn't decide to go forward with it specifically because when I like considered it, I was like, okay, that probably makes this a lot more narrow, right? Like it's much more situational because it has MR on it for one. Do I want this item to be more situational, or do I want this something to be something that like if you want to be an Echoes of Helia Karma player, you can just buy it. Right? It's like, and I was like, look at that. I was like, I kind of just want you to be able to buy it if you want to buy it. I don't think this is the kind of item that is supposed to be super situational. This does not mean I don't think there should be an MR Enchanter item. I actually have tried some prototypes for it. In fact, that earlier story I was talking about with the prototypes I was culling down for Split 2 Season 14, one of the prototypes that I actually made and culled pretty quickly was an MR Enchanter item, as an example of like I've played in that space. And I don't think that space is unreasonable at all to play in. However, I don't think that item is supposed to be this item. And if we do want to make that, I think we should make an item specifically for it that is more situational, that like actually supports this is the MR Enchanter item. So if that's what you really specifically liked about it, the old Athenes, sorry, I don't think I'm going to bring that back at least at this time. But it is something on my radar as like I think that is a potential viable thing that we could make for enchanters as an MR item so that you actually have access to a way to get MR if you really want to not get bursted by a mage or whatever. Anyway, I don't have screenshots for this other stuff, but I do have some stuff to talk about. So Essence Reaver rework, that is returning Sheen, and no bonus AD ratio like the previous one. Instead, it will have a crit ratio, so that you are rewarded for building more crit afterwards. There's a light Umbral Glaive rework. It's mostly similar, but it has the like old I think it's Duskstalker passive or like something like that. I don't remember the name of it, but the passive where if you're out of vision for a second, you get a buff on your next auto attack for a certain duration when you're seen, and you just like stab people and do bonus damage. The scales with lethality. That's back. And the item's a little more expensive. Horizon Focus is reverted to the previous version. This is something I've talked about. Actually, I think Quacks has a short up of me talking about this recently of like the item is just kind of boring. Oh, no, wait. Actually, that was on the front page of the League subreddit of someone like clip chimping me talking about the Horizon Focus, which to be clear, what I meant by that clip, if you saw it, was like not, hey, literally, they're, like they didn't have resources to make an item. They were poor. It was, they didn't have time, right? Like they just didn't have time. Anyway, that stuff aside. Horizon Focus will be reverted. We've seen the big AP, big haste stat stick. It's clearly not necessary for mages. It's clearly not that good for, like, not that important for control mages. So just going to revert it to the artillery mage version, which should be more exciting and more rewarding for the Vel'Kozes and the Zeraths of the world. Unending Despair is reverted to armor HP haste. It has more haste and it has the modern passive. So the reason why this is, I'm sure a lot of people will be kind of sad about this, saying like, oh, I like building Unending Despair every game. Part of the reason why we're doing it is because when we have this kind of item structure in the game, like a generic passive combined with generic stats, like dual resistances, it makes it very hard for us to actually make interesting tank items that are situational at all, right? It's like, we can't really reward you for building Unending Despair because it's good in every situation, right? The version of the tank item system where the tank items are somewhat situational, or like every tank item has at least some context outside of like first item, right? Like obviously you're going to buy your Cinder item or your Heart Steel or whatever. That's fine. Like I think first item doesn't need super context on it. But The second and third items, I think having context, I think is pretty important for the tank item system to make sense, because we have items like Randuin's, which can be incredibly powerful against crit, but when we have an item like Unending Despair being incredibly generic, it makes it very hard for us to appropriately power the narrow items, because the power that you get by just buying Unending Despair, like it essentially raises the floor a lot of what you can get when you're not paying attention, you're not thinking about your items at all. And so it makes us hard for us to properly reward tanks for itemizing correctly, right? Because we can't give you as much relative power when you build Randuin's, because the baseline is so high of just buying Unending Despair second item every single game. Instead, what we're going to be doing is kind of like what I was talking about with the haste items, is this Despair has 15 haste on it. So if you want to go for like a Sunfire Despair build, you can get a bit more haste. You can maybe even buy CDR boots. And again, maybe I can even try and finagle, push it up to like 20 haste. We'll see. I'm going to try and figure out a way to do that stats-wise to try and enable some higher haste builds. I also was thinking, by the way, about making the passive actually scale with haste, like the draining passive, so that then it's like a haste, sort of capstone-y effect for tanks. That part might not be doable, but I was thinking about it at least. Anyway, the big thing here is just that Unending Despair, I think when it's generic, it makes it very, very hard for us to structure the tank item system correctly, and that causes problems for the situational items, where it's like, yeah, why would you ever even, like, it's not even worth the time thinking about items like Randuin's, or items like Spirit Visage, or items like Force of Nature, when you have a generic, like a super generic item that can just be bought in every situation. It also really, I think, ruins the structure of the MR system as well, where when you have a hybrid resistance item that you can buy second, that's just good in every situation, it makes it really hard for you to justify ever buying an actual MR item outside of first item if you're leaning against magic damage, right? It's like, you look at live and it's like, okay, what are the MR items you see? You see, sometimes Canik Rookern and sometimes Hollow Radiance, first item. And sometimes you'll see a very late Visage on like Volibear, right? And that's pretty much it, because in the situations where you need MR, you don't have to take a divergence for that. And when the tank item structure, what I think is optimal for it is that you can get to be incredibly durable against magic damage if you want to be, but that needs to come at a trade-off. And the part of the problem with Despair was that you got to be pretty tanky against magic damage because you got a bit of MR from Despair, and then you got health from Despair and your other items. And it didn't, there was no need to buy an MR item. Basically, what I want is a slightly sharper experience, where if you buy an MR item as a tank, you are more favored against magic damage. But if you don't buy an MR item, you won't have access to Despair, and therefore you'll be a little bit less favored. You'll be a little bit more vulnerable to magic damage, basically making it so that trade-off, that decision, is more interesting, and there's more weight to the actual decision that you're making there around, do you buy the MR item or not, right? And that decision is not only more meaningful, which means we can reward tank players more for itemizing correctly, like you can actually get more power if you itemize correctly because of that, but also just that the mages, like especially like mages especially, but like just generally magic damage people can understand what's happening, of like, okay, I understand that I can't kill this tank easily because they spent an entire item slot buying an MR item, versus like, wow, it's weird I can't kill this Udyr or Sejuani or whatever. They have no MR item. I guess they have Despair. Maybe they have Mercs or something like that, right? And it's like, the amount of MR that Despair was giving was destabilizing parts of the system in ways that I really didn't like, so I took that out. Sunward Sky retuned. The item will now give a little bit more AD, but the bonk will be a little bit less damage and longer cooldown. Basically, the goal here is like, I think this item is too ubiquitous. The goal is overall the power level of the item is slightly lower. It also had to be retuned because we're making crit 200% by default, and so that was going to buff Sundered Sky. So maybe the end up is not actually net nerfed. I'm not sure, because I did give it 5 AD. I also just think the item only having 40 AD was felt bad. So retuned that. Hopefully that item feels good. Ult haste on Zeke's Convergence, and that is something that I'm going to be honest with you. Here is how Ult haste didn't end up on Zeke's Convergence when I did the changes to it in Season 14. I did the build path of Kindle Gem plus Glacial Shroud. I was like, oh, people are going to really want the Fire and Ice build path for the Fire and Ice item, right? That's why when you ult with Zeke's Convergence, it's like a storm of Fire and Ice, circling around you. It's like that's the theme of the item, right? You remember, if you go back in time, you remember that like old version, which was like, you get the Storm of Ice, you buff it, your AD carry to give, fire damage on their attack, and then there's like special bonuses when they're affected by both debuffs at the same time. That stuff was like way overcomplicated and like nonsense. But I thought the Fire and Ice theming was cool, so I kept the build path the same. And because it had haste from the Glacial Shroud, I didn't want to give it additional ult haste at the time. I've kind of come around of like, look, we just have 30 haste on Hexplate, like 30 ult haste on Hexplate, and like, for a while we had 35 total ultimate haste on Malignance, which was crazy numbers, right? Actually, what is it now? I don't even remember off the top of my head. It doesn't matter. Maybe we still have 35. Is it 35? Is it 30? I don't know. Anyway, basically I've come around to like, apparently we can give larger amounts of ult haste on items than I thought. So I threw some ult haste on Zeke's Convergence because it seems like it's kind of free. The item seems like it could be buffed. So now it can hopefully serve the niche of like, yep, this is the item that you buy when you want to, engage with your ult a lot or whatever, right? Like, should be really exciting for like Rakan and Alistar now, because obviously they care a lot about their ultimates. Let them do their thing more frequently. Hopefully that's fun for people. LDR has Giant Slayer. There are some nerfs to it. It's more expensive. It has 5% less pen. And then Mortal also has 5% less pen, but is less expensive. I think that's the list that's going on PB. The new version of Giant Slayer is a little different from the previous. I won't get into super long detail about it because you'll be able to see it at some point. Yeah, basically just doing this as, hey, we've kind of stripped away most of the anti-health things, especially for AD carries over time. I think we could return one of them. I am not a super big fan of AD carries being overly anti-health or like having the ability to be overly anti-health, but I do think it makes sense for them to have some amount of health countering, and so I think bringing back max out at 15% Giant Slayer on LDR makes some sense for the class, and at the same time it lets us scale a little bit back on the percent pen, because of course most of the targets you're going to be targeting with Giant Slayer to get bonus damage against, everyone has some bonus health, right? So you're going to get at least a few points of percent damage amp. But losing a bit of percent pen, I think, is good for the systems, because currently I think armor is actually a little bit too mitigatable. I also think there's too much armor for what it's worth, but I think particularly thinking about like tanks that are stacking up like 300 plus armor, I think it's a little bit too easy to mitigate large amounts of armor, and it's a little bit too necessary to mitigate armor on like, squishy champions, right? Because like, as an example, like random 80 carries get like 100 armor at almost 100 armor at level 18, right? So there are some things that I think are structurally off, but I generally think that, this is a trade-off I assume, that I think most AD carries are pretty happy to take of like, I get, 5% less pen, but I get Giant Slayer. Okay, cool. I'm slightly less good against armor, but I have actually have some game against health stacking. Great. And to be clear on the current version of it, it scales 15% if they have 1500 bonus HP. Doesn't care about your health at all. Doesn't care, like about relative difference. It's just how much bonus health do they have. That's it. It's very simple. Just bonus health gives me damage amp. That's it. I personally like this simpler, more straightforward version more that doesn't care if you have bonus health. In particular, because I found that the like relative versions were like weirdly punishing for, say, like Yasuo and Yone, for example. It's like, I don't actually think they need to be punished at dealing with tanks. Like I think that's kind of strange. So like the relative difference versions where it's like, they have to have this much more health than you. It's like, you know what? It's weird that that's like worse on Zeri as an example, right? Because Zeri, if you don't know this, actually has bad resistances per level and a lot of health to, encourage her to do the builds that we actually want her to do. And so if I did the relative, health version, then it makes it like actually kind of bad on Zeri, which is very weird, right? Because she has like, I think she has like 2,700 HP at level 18 or something like that. It's like some crazy number like that. Where, there are some fighters that actually don't get, too much more HP than that. You would have a hard time like getting the value. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. LDR, Giant Slayer. That's what we're talking about. You can buy multiple tier items again. I don't remember if I talked about this earlier or not. At this point, this video is 2 hours long, so I honestly don't remember if I said anything about it or not. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Like I said, you can buy, well, like I said, or like I didn't say, I don't know, you can buy multiple tier items. You have to stack them separately like you did before. The current version, I will note, is that you cannot have multiple tiers in your inventory. So you actually, when you finish your stacking your completed tier item, you'll actually have to base and then buy another tier. So you're not allowed to have like a cooking tier item and another random tier in your inventory at the same time, because I felt like that was more fair. The story of this is kind of interesting. This is the story of how the tier stacking was disabled. Ezreal was doing a Manamune Trinity Force Seraphs build, right, where you would get your Manamune stacked while you were building your Trinity Force, and then you would buy a tier afterwards to then stack Seraphs, right? This is after the Ezreal VGU, where we buffed his AP ratios a lot. So someone had this idea of like, okay, look, no one actually really does this. It's kind of a meme thing people do of building multiple tier items. It just takes too long to do. It's like, who cares, right? Like, we can just disable this. And that people are like, okay, this has like very low collateral damage. It is kind of cool, but we can just disable it to make Ezreal's builds better. But for those of you who were around when this happened, you probably remember what happened, which was that Ezreal's build didn't really change meaningfully because he just started buying Ludens instead. So he would go Manamune, Trinity Force, Ludens. It was a little worse, but it was basically the same build where you built a mana AP item. And so he ended up needing his AP ratios being nerfed anyway. And then we didn't revert the change of not being able to stack tier items, which I personally always thought was cool, even if it's not actually very good, because it just takes so long to actually do it. So ultimately, the goal here is that you can have some fun with this, and maybe there's a cool Sona build with it that's actually good. I don't know. But you'll be able to buy multiple tier items again, try it out, have some fun with it. If it's actually optimal on anyone, I don't know if we'd do something about that, but I figured it was pretty safe to just let people try. It seems like it'd be fun and probably harmless, and maybe even could lead to some cool, builds on, again, especially like Sona, but maybe some mages as well. Maybe some cool, heal your allies builds with Diadem of Songs could be cool, where you have like Seraphs, you go like Roa Seraph's Diadem. You could get big chunky heals on your allies. Maybe that's cool. I don't know. Anyway, probably some other stuff. The Redemption. Redemption is the one that I've said multiple times, but I forgot to put on this slide. Redemption, I replaced the Kindle Gem in the build path with a Fiendish Codex. So it is now more Enchanter favored, especially like Magi Enchanters that care a lot about AP. If you're not familiar, if you didn't watch Pro Play, basically over the course of the last season, people gravitated more and more towards Redemption over the course of this season, and I've kind of come to the conclusion it's all about Redemption. Redemption was basically first item every game on supports at Worlds, with the exception of Nico and Pantheon, I think. But every other support was doing Redemption first item. Not that it's necessarily a problem. We're seeing a lot of Redemption, but it was to a pretty extreme degree. And Redemption is pretty balanced for solo queue. So there's kind of a dual goal here of, hey, let's reduce the presence of this item in Pro, make it a little bit riskier to go for because you don't get health from it. And number two, we don't actually need this item for tank supports anymore, right? When Redemption was originally made, tank support itemization was very, very, very lacking, right? A lot of the items that we have today had not been made yet. And so the conclusion was kind of we don't actually need this item for tank supports anymore, so we could put this more firmly in the Enchanter space, and that's totally okay. We also have other Enchanter items that have health on them if they need that, durability. So should overall be chill, hopefully, to do that. And hopefully the Enchanters enjoy the AP. I personally actually really liked playing it on Ivern now. You are a little squishier. It's definitely noticeable how squishy, being a little squishier on Ivern, but getting AP for building Redemption first item was pretty fun as well. I think that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you watched this is a 2 hour and 2 minute and almost 30 seconds now video, and I'm probably going to continue here for a bit. So main thing is thanks for watching. Hope people enjoy the new season. This video is obviously very focused on items specifically because that's what I worked on for this season. If you are interested in another video, specifically talking about anything, whether it's overgrowth or the plate changes or the epic changes or the role quests or whatever, please let me know. I'm happy to do a video. My current plan is that probably when the patch notes go up, I will probably do a maybe even longer than this video, going through all of the patch notes and talking through what the goals and what we were looking for and maybe past versions and prototypes and stuff like that. I might do that. That's my current plan. But if people would like me to to do a review or maybe talk over some PB game footage, right? I'll probably play some games on the PB once it goes up and maybe stream that. So go follow my stream if you're interested in seeing that, because I'll probably do some of that once the stuff is live. Overall, thanks for watching. If you did watch the whole 2 hours, that's very impressive that there are actually people out there that want to listen to me talk for 2 hours about items that I made. That's always cool for me to hear. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. If you have any other questions about the items, please let me know. I'm happy, and again, if you're looking for any other videos about the new season, please let me know. Like, hey, I would love to hear, you talk about this, right? I'm happy to, figure something out and maybe make some more videos if you're interested in that. If people, one specific one is if people want to hear about feats, and obviously that we're removing feats, since I did make it. If people want to hear a video about that, I was thinking about making one about like kind of the, the rise and fall of feats. If people want to hear that, hear me talk about feats for a while, then let me know. I'm happy to make videos if people want to watch them. So kind of just let me know what kinds of videos you would like to see from me, especially in relation to the next season, because obviously now is a good time to do that. But yeah, anyway, aside from that, thank you all for watching, and maybe catch you in my next video.